What is going on, everybody? We are here. We are ready. And the Chicago Bears just lost a backbreaker. But on the bright side, Justin Fields he was over 300 yards if you count the rushing yards, 291, a touchdown, some huge plays. And hey, if you came into this season thinking of it as a developmental year, that was an awfully nice way to start it. And yes, if you can't tell, we are here with the one and only Rishab Sikri. I got it right again, right? Thank goodness. Awesome. Because who else? Who else was going to go through it on Monday night, for crying out loud? So we will be here. We're ready to go. Rishab, how are you doing this evening?
Because I was kind of thinking this game was going to be a blowout after the first quarter, right? Like we were already down. I think first or second quarter we were already down like 14-0, and I was like, oh my God, is this going to be a repeat of the Buccaneers game? But then we come back all the way, even after all the penalties, and man, that was a fun game to watch. Though I'm not gonna lie, that was a lot of fun.
Honestly, like that's I think the heartbreaker. So look, I am not from the Midwest. I'm from I don't know if I guess Texas would be the deep south, though Dallas does not feel like it sometimes. And I watched a similar game just this weekend. I was at Fort Worth when TCU beat Baylor, which sucked because Baylor's my alma mater. But the worst part about a great football game is when you're on the other end of it and you go, wait a minute, that was a great football game. You know what I mean?
100%, dude. But honestly, like going into this season, I think we all knew that the only thing that really matters this year is Justin Fields' development. And if you watch what Justin Fields did in this game on the road and in prime time as well, in front of like millions of people, there's no way you should be mad after this loss, man. Like obviously the loss sucks at the end, but Bears were going to win a Super Bowl this year anyway. So long term, man, we're still fine.
Whoa. Don't get too many people too started about that, because I feel like there were some people that were hanging on to whether, I don't know if it was the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is obviously a big ask, but and we'll talk about this when we actually get on the show. I mean, you got to think this is the death knell for the playoffs, right? Like now they're 3-6. They don't have a lot of games that they could win, like left on their schedule to get to 9, right?
The only thing that gives me hope somewhat is that there's like a lot of bad teams in that 7th spot, right? Like the Falcons are the one ahead of us. And then we also got obviously the 49ers there. We got the Vikings there, which technically if we beat the Vikings twice and we get a couple upset wins, like that's being very hopeful. So I guess there's like a tiny chance, but realistically, you're right. Like this probably wipes out our chances of the playoffs.
Which, hey, truth be told, who cares? I mean, seriously. And I'm going to say this at this point until, I don't know if it's the day I die, because I don't know if it'll matter that long. But at the very least, like, we can go to bed feeling like, at the end of the day, truth be told, let me ask you this. I'll ask you this on the show again. I actually love this question. Which would you have rather had, right? A 10-7 season where Fields mirrors Trubisky maybe a little too closely, but the defense just explodes, or exactly the season we're getting where now Fields seems like he's really starting to find himself. Like, who's to say that he will be a superstar, but at the very least we're seeing some pretty heavy flashes of quality quarterbacking for a young guy, even though we're losing. I mean, I would take this. What about you?
I would 100% take that too, dude. I mean, I know somebody, I think it was Danny Parkins, or somebody asked this on Twitter before the season. I saw a lot of people in the comment section were like, oh, why are a lot of people choosing the second option with Fields having a better season and the Bears losing? It's because, dude, long term, you have to have a star quarterback if you want to win a Super Bowl. So even if you go 10-7, like you mentioned, and if we have Fields looking like Trubisky, long term, that's not going to win us a Super Bowl long term, right? So if we're having development from Fields, even if we're losing, like that's literally all that matters, right? Because long term, hopefully, if we get a different GM, I don't know who the GM is going to be after this year, but whoever it is, hopefully they build around Fields, get a better offensive lineman, get more weapons, maybe get a new head coach, in my opinion at least. So I'm still happy, dude. Like I'm very happy after this loss.
And on that note, honestly, we really might as well just go ahead and dive into the show, because I keep having to remember that, like, this isn't just 3 p.m. And thank you so much, Ty, for supporting the channel. Like, this isn't right after the game. This is like, oh yeah, it's really late. So
it's totally fine. I don't have to be up until like late tomorrow anyway. So
really? Oh gosh, I may honestly have to do some work on my. So this is my work computer that everybody,
Yeah.
I just don't move it out of the shot. I think I'm just lazy. but so I may have to do some work after the show, for crying out loud. But so let's dive into it. Are you ready? I'm ready.
Yeah, 100% ready.
All right. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, right here on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel. And honestly, I am way too jazzed up for 11 p.m. as the Bears not only took a game the whole 60 minutes that looked like it was over right at the start, but I'm here with Rishab Sikri, oh gosh, almost had it there, of DWCProductions. We're ready to break this game down because what a wild one, as Justin Fields not only eclipses 200 yards for the first time in a little while, but he hits 291 passing, a touchdown, an interception, adds 40-plus rushing. I'd have to go back and check in, I think, a statement game. Something really, really cool to see. Rishab, how you feeling?
I'm feeling amazing, man. I know I was talking with you in the pregame, but this is probably the happiest I've ever been about a Bears loss, probably in my entire life, just because for the first time, I truly feel like the Bears have a star quarterback, a future star quarterback. Obviously, he's not this level of a star quarterback right now, but the progression we're seeing from him every single week, even though, you know, the offensive line is still not 100% good. We have a very big lack of weapons, too. Our play caller has a lot of question marks about him, even considering all that. To go on the road on primetime television and to put up the performance that you did after everything that happened in that game, right? Like we had the refs calling everything against us. And man, we just, how many penalties did we have in that game, by the way? Wasn't it like 19 or something?
I'd have to go back and look, but
okay.
it was at least 11 last I saw. I mean, obviously a lot, but to piggyback off of that, 12 looks like we've got in the chat. But the scariest part about it, you mentioned penalties. Penalties is one thing, but we've got, and this is just going off the top of my head, 4 offsides, an illegal formation, a roughing the or a hit after the whistle, a taunting penalty, and you could say that a ton of these were garbage. And I am going to, as soon as we're done with, you get a response on this, we're going to put a moratorium on ref talk for at least 15 minutes. I think we can agree that there's enough other stuff we can talk about, but gracious alive, there were so many self-inflicted wounds from this Bears team. Some, again, let's say really ticky-tack calls, but we'll talk about that later. Even so, to see Justin Fields stand up in the moment, down 20-26, I mean, that's one of those, like, you can't write the script to any better. And on 3rd and 1, he puts a dot in Allen Robinson's hands, follows it up immediately with a ball that looked so unbelievably calm to Darnell Mooney for a 16-yard score that, honestly, you could have pinched me and I probably would have woken up if I had it to do over again. Like, seriously, man. That was something that you see on your Xbox. That was something that you've gone to bed dreaming about as a Bears fan. But to see it in real life, like, that's the Chicago Bears quarterback. It's hard for me to not just be over the moon. You know what I mean?
Man. I mean, I've seen a lot of games where I'm not trying to like hate on Trubisky or anything, obviously, but this reminds me of Trubisky's rookie year, where like he had so many moments late in games, because we were actually in a lot of those games just because I don't think we lost a lot of games by like multiple possessions the first year, but a lot of the times, man, like Trubisky just came up short. Like it was either like an interception or like out of bounds or something. But I really feel like Justin Fields actually has it, right? Like I saw on Twitter, did he audible into that play to Allen Robinson, by the way?
Oh.
I didn't.
I have no idea. I have to see it again.
Yeah, there's no way to know right now, I guess. But if you guys know, definitely talk about it in the chat or whatever. But according to some people, he audible into that play, but whatever the case is, to make that throw on 3rd and 1 and followed up by that pass to Darnell Mooney as well, like that's something that like veteran quarterbacks do that have like 3-4 years experience in the league. That's not something you see out of a rookie usually.
Yep.
So that was amazing.
And the funniest part about talking about Fields, because we have to talk about it, right? There were some major down moments. Like, if you want to talk about the rookie roller coaster, we were all over the place. Like, he had a couple balls that just flat missed their spot. I can think of one where he led Marquise Goodwin much too far and almost got his head taken off. Another to Allen Robinson that massively missed a curl route spot. LOL, curl routes. And as among other things, one where I thought this was the funniest one and probably the least like problematic, but Justin Fields pulled the ball down on a quick scramble, pointed out to Cole Kmet to block a guy on his right, and promptly ran straight into him. I mean, like, there are some plays that definitely would make you go, that's kind of weird, but the whole point of the rookie roller coaster, and what I think matters, right, is that every time the rookie makes a mistake, they then return it with some kind of big play. And at the end of the day, on where the Bears could really only seemingly run the ball out of the Wildcat, which is its own conversation, but all of their other offensive drives were kickstarted by big throws by none other than Justin Fields, and I think that's important, especially when you're playing a defense to the caliber of the Steelers.
It has to be, man. I mean, also the thing that I really like the most is that he's put together back-to-back now pretty stellar performances, right? Like he had that game last week against the 49ers where he actually performed pretty well, in my opinion. He also had, some mistakes, obviously, but for the most part, you could say that was a good game by Justin Fields when looking at everything around him. And then he's followed that up with this performance again, which, like you mentioned, there were mistakes. There were overthrown balls. There were some, mistakes at the line of scrimmage as well. There's a lot of stuff that he did wrong, obviously, but to come back and especially that last touchdown drive, man, that was like one of the most amazing things I've seen. So, obviously rookie mistakes are going to happen, but feels like so far he's learning from the majority of them. So I think we're still in good hands.
Now, there's another player that I have to talk about. Let's go through game balls, right? And if you want to, I'll leave a certain game ball for you, but there is somebody that I have to talk about because out of absolutely nowhere, I'll just say his name. There are a lot of people, whether it's on Windy City Gridiron, whether it's on Bears Twitter, that have just gone after Cole Kmet in an almost brutal fashion. I mean, like, just because he was drafted in the second round, it became paramount that he become a 1,000-yard receiver. And if he doesn't, he sucks, and so on and so forth. And I was never huge on Kmet, but as people started pulling deep into the negatives, all of a sudden the fact that I was saying he looks like a single, maybe a double, like that became, I'm now high on Cole Kmet. And hey, tonight, with an 87-yard game, 6 receptions, and all of them important, Cole Kmet came up big. And there's nothing to say that he is going to be this every single game, and I haven't checked the stats yet, it wouldn't surprise me if he's now got more receiving yards than Allen Robinson on the season. A Bears passing attack that is not moving the ball well, how do I not mention number 85, who seems to be catching most of the opportunities thrown his way, though obviously he's had some pretty high profile, I don't want to call them miscues, but moments where he hasn't come up as big as you'd want him. Even so, tonight, especially, what was it that there are a couple of these where I can clearly tell I'm getting confused with Jimmy Graham, like that seed up the seam that Graham caught over his shoulder. But number 85 was all over the place. He looked like the dependable Kyle Rudolph-esque tight end that Bears fans wanted to see. I don't know. I feel like you got to mention him. You know what I mean?
You have to, man. He had an amazing game, probably the best game of his career, in my opinion, right? Like, obviously, in the middle of the field, he was big on multiple throws. That first drive that we had, that I think it led to a field goal. Yeah, it did lead to a field goal. But on that drive, I think it was all passes to Cole Kmet, and he was making some pretty nice catches too. Like he had to jump for one, he had to kind of go to the side for one. So I think that people definitely are giving up on Cole Kmet a little bit too early, because even though there's no way he's going to be Travis Kelce, in my opinion, or like he's not that type of tight end. Obviously, he's not that athletic. He doesn't have that same physical profile, but he could be a solid, like you mentioned, like Kyle Rudolph type of tight end, which if we pair him up with some speedy wideouts on the end and then add another tight end, like that could actually be a good option for Fields. And we saw that in this game. So, yeah, that's a good point bringing up Kmet, man.
Now, for your offensive game ball, who do you want to give it to?
I'm sure this is no surprise to anybody, but definitely rookie quarterback Justin Fields, because guys, in my pregame video, if you saw this on YouTube, I picked the Bears to lose. I think it was like 21-17. So I definitely did not see this offensive explosion. I don't know if you want to call it offensive explosion, but it kind of was, man. At least for the Bears, I did not see this coming whatsoever, because the Steelers also, I think they had a top 10 defense entering this game, right? Like according to DVOA, even yards given up, I think they were top 10 in like a lot of the different metrics. So to go up against a pass rush that had obviously, TJ Watt, they had Cam Hayward in there. I think he got injured though in the middle of the game. So Cam Hayward was not there the entire time, but regardless, like they had an amazing pass rush. They had a good secondary too, and to go up against that with all the miscues we had on offense too, with the penalties that we were making too, with the play calling sometimes being questionable. After all of that, to come back and almost win the game as a rookie on the road on prime time, you have to get the game ball for that.
I think there's no contest here. I mean, one thing that I think can become incredibly difficult when it comes to Bears fans evaluating quarterbacks is, I heard somebody say this a while ago. I actually kind of agree. Bears fans are brutal to quarterbacks. Like, God forbid you miss a pass, because we tend to act like, even though obviously like league standard completion percentage is somewhere between 65 and 70, that when Justin Fields on the hop spots Darnell Mooney 45 yards downfield, oh, he's got to hit that. Or when he leaves a ball about 5 yards short to Marquise Goodwin on a 50-yard completion, come on, get it out there, that's a touchdown. Like, there were definitely little ticky-tack things that you could pick on Fields for, and he had plenty of rookie moments. The interception that looked like he threw it straight to a defensive lineman, I haven't seen it a second time. Maybe the guy just closed off the window in some kind of beautiful way, but you can't really be throwing those. I think anybody's going to agree with that, but there's just 100%. Too much good. I think
the commentators were saying that was like kind of a tough play and Fields just got unlucky. But like you mentioned, you probably shouldn't show that, shouldn't throw that low at least.
It's one of those where I look at it and I think to myself, the big plays were there. Rising to the moment was there. I mean, Fields took 26 seconds at the very end of the game and made it feel interesting in a way that I legitimately didn't expect, because I was like, well, we don't have a timeout. We're done. You know what I mean? But so Fields absolutely deserves a game ball. I had a feeling you'd pick him. I just had to at least call out the receiving leader of the evening. But, okay, so we're about 6 minutes into the show, and unfortunately we have not talked about the side of the ball I think has been a bit of a disappointment. Like, we've got to talk defense at some point, right?
Yeah.
What did you think about the evening's defensive showing?
So I definitely didn't think it was as bad as I thought it was going to be, at least with how they started out the game. How many yards did they give up, though? I have this.
I'll take a look at that while you keep going.
I got it. It's so they allowed 280 yards, and we had 414 offensive yards. Damn. So we thoroughly outgained them, at least in the game. But I think our defense, the thing is, like, they were having some moments where they were creating some insane stops. Like in the middle of that game, even when our offense was sputtering, they were coming up with stops like back to back to back. So that was obviously a positive sign, but especially with not having Khalil Mack, man, the loss of Khalil Mack hurts the Bears defense like way more than people want to admit. And also Eddie Jackson as well. Okay, I know a lot of people hate on him for his tackling issues or whatnot, but for the most part, I still think he's a better player in coverage than people give him credit for. So obviously not having Eddie Jackson, not having Khalil Mack, that's going to hurt us. But regardless, I do agree we don't have the cornerbacking talent right now to really put up with, receivers like this, right? Like, they have so many good receivers on this Steelers receiving core. So, Deontay Johnson, he was mossing Kinder Wilder multiple times out there. We had other guys mossing other guys. So I think the overall performance, it was not good by any means, because we still didn't play good enough to win this game. We still allowed some easy touchdowns, but I don't think it was like as bad as people say it is, at least on Twitter.
So I feel like what's hard about this is that I want to be there too, but I'm pretty sure the Steelers just scored more points than they've scored the entire season. So while the yards were relatively low, you got to remember that there's nothing harder to gain than yards that aren't in front of you, considering that the Steelers started on their side of the 50 at least 3 times, maybe 4. I mean, the Steelers got plenty of short fields, but the Bears defense did not seem like it could come up with a stop when they needed to, and I don't know. It's hard, especially because, like you're talking about, like, on one hand, we are talking about a defense that's missing $45 million of cap space if you consider Mack and Ejax not on the field. I'm also a huge fan of what the Bears can do with Eddie Jackson, because I think there's a huge reason that you did not see Kindle Vildor picked on like he was tonight. When Ejax was on the field, lo and behold, he comes off of it, and suddenly you see Duke Shelley and Danny Trevathan and Kindle Vildor just getting picked apart. What Desai's able to do with disguising coverages with Eddie Jackson in the backfield, it makes a big difference. It's a big loss, but goodness gracious, 22 struggled so badly this evening. Know what I mean?
He got mossed so many times in this game, which some of them, they were kind of tough, obviously, because the receivers he were going up against, like they were way taller than him, but still, like he had a lot of moments where he was beat and just getting caught on. And I mean, I don't think he's gonna be in the Bears' plans long term. So I guess long term it doesn't matter that much. But I mean, you bring up a lot of good points. Like I wasn't trying to say the Bears' defense was like good in any way. I just think that it wasn't like absolutely horrible, like people were saying, considering the circumstances. But it obviously has to be better moving forward.
I think what's hardest about this is that the Bears
Yeah.
defense did some things right on defense. Like, not only did you get the occasional pass deflection, not only did they actually do a pretty decent job against Najee Harris in the run game, but they seemed fairly scrappy. I don't know how else to say it, but Ben Roethlisberger throwing for 208 yards, and all 208 of those yards felt really impactful. And not to mention, there are a couple plays that I can think of just off the top of my head, like Ben Roethlisberger's touchdown to, I think it was Pat Freiermuth, where it felt like he had upwards of 6 seconds in the pocket. The one where Roethlisberger stepped in, launched the ball as far as his poor arm would take it at this point, and found somebody deep in the middle of the field where it felt like DeAndre Houston Carson, who knows, we'll have to see the all-22, was just lost back there. There were too many of these plays that when you're going up against as poor a defensive team or offensive team as the Steelers are, seeing those hurts that much more. And again, like, here Justin Fields came out with the worst passing attack in football, puts up 20 points even, if we're not counting the 7 that comes off of the defensive touchdown that we'll get to later, because that was wild, raucous. But so he puts up 291 yards, helps get the team to 20 points that the defense then adds on to, and you lost, which is not good. You know what I mean?
It's definitely not good enough, man. Like I don't think anybody thinks our defense is like elite anymore. It's definitely nowhere close to what it used to be in 2018. But I still give them credit somewhat for coming up with those stops in the middle, just when our offense wasn't doing much of anything, because they had a ton of short fields to work with as well. They had bad field position there, so it makes it kind of tough, obviously. But like you mentioned, they definitely weren't good enough to win this game.
I feel like what's really brutal, and this is the hardest part, because I have seen a lot of Bears folks that are going back and forth on Desai. So before I launch into this, where are you at? If you had like a Desai-ometer, are you wavering? Still a fan? Where are you at?
I'm kind of like in the middle on him right now. I don't know what to think, just because I feel like he doesn't have the most talent to work with in some ways, just because obviously he has big name guys like Khalil Mack, he has Eddie Jackson, he has other big stars that obviously they are good players in the NFL, but then you also have a cornerbacking trio with, Kindle Vildor on it, a guy that has really not accomplished much success in the NFL before this. You also got Duke Shelley as well, a late round pick that hasn't done much either. So I feel like he doesn't have the most talent to work with, and he's had some good moments here and there, like the game against the Bengals. He did a fantastic job there. He had some other really nice games. The Raiders game also was pretty good. So he's had some up and downs. And I just feel like it's not fair to give a complete grade on him so far, just because it's only his first year and he also doesn't have the most talent to work with. So I'm kind of in the middle right now. Like there's some good things, there's some bad things, but overall can't really give him a complete grade yet.
I totally hear you. Now, granted, I'm a bit of a sucker for what somebody can do. I'll be the first to say that it definitely held me on to Matt Nagy for, I think, a little bit more longer than I could have been. But I've seen what Desai can do with talent. I mean, let's remember that he was able to do what he did against the Bengals, against the Raiders, and so on and so forth, with Kindle Vildor, Duke Shelley, Danny Trevathan, Alec Ogletree, Travis Gibson playing significant minutes. Like, the majority of the Bears' coverage net probably isn't very good at playing coverage football, but Desai was able to build a unit that I think allowed at one point less than 220 passing yards per game through, I think, week 5, which I think that means something, especially when then Khalil Mack, I think a lot of Bears fans would laugh when I say this, but the crown jewel of the Bears secondary is still probably Eddie Jackson, even with Jaylen Johnson surging more so at the start of the season. I wouldn't say falling off late, but he was looking pretty incredible, so on and so forth, and has now gotten to the point where he's solid as a CB1. I think about what Desai can do, and like you're saying, the talent difference between that defense and this defense is pretty remarkable, but at the same time, it's a bummer to be losing games against offensively challenged teams where you give up 29. You know what I mean?
Oh, it 100% is, man. I think he's also struggled against the top tier quarterbacks. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger is not a top tier quarterback, so tonight was kind of a bad showing overall. But going up against Tom Brady, going up against Aaron Rodgers, that's obviously not a recipe for success usually. And when you don't have the talents like you mentioned, it's going to make it really hard. So I think the overall stats for the season now look pretty bad. I think we're like bottom 15 now in like yards given up and like other ratings, but I still think there's like stuff to be positive about in the future if he just gets, more talents.
Absolutely. But I mean, we'll see. Because like you're talking about, I mean, at this point, you think it's fair to say that the whole Bears coaching staff, like the seat is heating up? What do you think?
Oh, dude, I think Nagy is gone after this season. I mean, I obviously don't have anything to back that up, but I just feel like unless we have like an offensive explosion for the next few games and like sneak into the playoffs somehow, I don't know how you can justify bringing him back because we still have so many penalties every single game. Like our team still seems very undisciplined, all these illegal formations and all. And even with the play calling, man, I don't know if like how much credit to give to Nagy and how much credit to give to Fields for making some of these plays work, right? Like, because on some of these plays, he's kind of scrambling and making something out of nothing. So, in my personal opinion, I think we should get rid of Nagy and just start fresh next year, because there's a lot of top offensive minds that might be available to us. But what do you think about Nagy?
I was hoping you would bring up the penalties because that's absolutely where I wanted to take this. Like I think the hardest part about watching this game for me, and I'll kick this to you. So think the hardest part about this game, but for me, it was this unbearably slow start. It felt like for the first quarter and a half, the Bears looked like one of the worst teams in the league, if not the worst, though that's a pretty tough ask with Detroit out there. And yes, that's me taking a direct shot. But there was nothing that defined this more to me than I think it was 2nd and 9 in the first Bears drive. They ran the ball, set up 3rd and 5, and threw short of the sticks. Okay, not the start you want when you got the ball, but you punt, it comes back the other way, and then they start out with a 3-series drive. They end up going 3 and out, and on this drive, they never have a single play where everybody knows where to be. Like whether it's Justin Fields yelling, "You get over here, come on, move in," or a double shift. They had one where they lined up in an illegal formation, shifted it to a legal formation. Justin Fields hits a pretty 17-yard corner route that doesn't count. And the Bears don't pick up any positive yards for the next 10 football minutes after that. I mean, there was so much of this stuff where I literally couldn't tell you whether it felt overplanned. I couldn't tell you whether it felt just mushy, whether it was a coach's fault or so on and so forth. But whatever it was, it looked like a disaster, for crying out loud. And
I did also, go ahead.
No, jump in.
Also, you can't blame this all on having a rookie quarterback because we've seen these things over the last 3 years now. Even with Mitch, even with Nick Foles, a veteran quarterback, we've had these same exact problems every single year. So at this point, you're kind of asking yourself, who is the real problem here? It has to be Matt Nagy at this point, the teacher, right?
I mean, for crying out loud, like you're talking about, I think it was Dan Durkin who made the joke on Twitter talking about at this point, it's just a Bears game ritual to take a timeout and have a penalty coming out of it. But for crying out loud, the Bears, whether you want to say statistics or their general attitude after taking a break, which usually comes, by the way, from not getting lined up in the first place, is so abysmal. It's you can get really high on Fields and still be there, but what we saw to open this game was so poor. I mean, it took heroics. We could say them, very good halftime adjustments to get the Bears back in the game. They obviously cobbled a decent plan together on the back end, but even so, I mean, I find myself at this stage legitimately wondering, not if, but when, because the NFL just changed the rules. If you have a fired head coach, you can start interviewing at the back end of the NFL season. So there's a legitimate advantage to firing your coach in season. And I'm just wondering when the shoe's going to drop, because this felt to me at least like a game where with 4 offsides penalties, not just 3, not just 2, drive killing penalties that were on the coaching staff and so on and so forth. This was a game that felt to me like the coaching staff held back. I don't want to say an otherwise talented roster just yet, but that the slow start was very attributable to the guys in the coaching room, and for guys in the hot seat, that can't be good, you know?
I 100% agree with every single thing you said there. I mean, I think his seed already, like after the last couple losses we've had, especially the loss against the Buccaneers, where we got just completely embarrassed in all different phases of the game. Our defense was horrible, our offense was horrible. Like we've had so many of these losses now, where I feel like even a good stretch to end the year, it shouldn't save you because we've already seen so much bad from him already. But I just don't know what the McCaskies or whoever's going to make the decision, like what are they thinking about Matt Nagy? Like if we have a good offense, are they going to keep him, or does it matter on like if we win the games? Because like that's a legitimate question to ask. Like, will they give him the time to develop Justin Fields? I'm kind of getting scared they might do that if we actually have a good offense to end the year.
I know, right? I mean, the worst part about this game was I remember I used to critique Mitch for the same thing, where it was always hard to watch Mitch play hero when putting out his own fire. And in this, it felt like Justin Fields was playing hero, and so you want to almost give Matt Nagy some credit, like, oh, feisty team, never gave up, rah, rah, rah. But, I mean, they were in a 14-0 hole for a reason, and it wasn't because they were playing well. I mean, I get it. Everybody says constantly, right? Like, I just want this team to play 4 quarters of football. Well, yeah, so does everybody, you know? Like, if your team theoretically played what you would consider 4 quarters of football, they'd never lose on any given week, because usually whenever your team doesn't play well is when you consider them not playing 4 quarter, or like not playing quote unquote that quarter of football, right? But even so, I mean, I find it hard to look at this game as a redeemer of Nagy so much as that weird monkey's paw game that some Bears fan was out there wanting, right? Where they go, well, I don't want Matt Nagy to look good, but I want Justin Fields to play well. So figure that out. And here we are, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I personally still think he's getting fired just because I don't see us beating teams like the Ravens or the Packers coming up, or even the Seahawks. That's going to be with Russell Wilson coming back. So we could technically still be losing a lot of games to the point where, you know, if we have a really, really bad record, they could think about like blowing this up, like maybe even firing the GM. Do you think Ryan Pace is going to be gone after this year? Like, what are your opinions on that?
So the trouble there is that when you talk about whether Pace is going to be gone, I have to think about whether the McCaskies would fire him. Would I fire him? I wouldn't hesitate. I would have given him his walking papers last year. I am not a fan at all of the way that Ryan Pace seems to get a $500 refrigerator for $1,000, for instance. And you can look at Khalil Mack and say he's a great player. How exciting is it to have Khalil Mack on your roster? But then you look at the rest of the roster, and it feels like any quality player on the Bears is already being paid for, except for Roquan Smith and Jaylen Johnson, with some Darnell Mooney and Justin Fields in there. Sure, but I think it's just wild to me how Pace has managed his resources. The trouble is, I get the impression the McCaskies love him. So I don't know what's going to happen there, whether he's going to get his next shot, but I do think for some reason he might get a little more rope than Nagy. And if anything, we've just heard too many comments, right? About, man, Ryan's brought a totally new or a totally new like style of football. He's brought the Bears into the future from there. And it seems like he's modernized him, but I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I kind of think the same things as you. Just because like, drafting a quarterback, I don't know like what the statistics are on like a GM getting fired their first year they draft a certain quarterback. Like I'm thinking that can't be that high, because usually you want to give a GM a couple years to work out with a rookie quarterback. Well, Pace has already been here for I think going on 8 years now, right?
It's 8 years.
Yeah. So it's been a very long time. We still don't have a single playoff win, and I know on Twitter I joke all the time about him like being doing good things here, doing good things there. But like obviously the track record overall is not that good. And like you mentioned, he hasn't developed the most resources into, the offense. And that's where you win your games now in the NFL. So I think there are some things to be kind of happy about with Pace. Obviously getting Justin Fields, probably the best quarterback prospect in Bears history. That's something to be proud about. It seems like he's also kind of changing in his drafting. Like he used his first 3 picks last year on the offense, but he did also trade up there, like to get Tevin Jenkins. He's traded up pretty much every single year, and we don't have the draft capital to necessarily like build the parts of the roster that we need to build up. We don't have the most depth either. So I think that long-term, Pace has not been a good GM so far, but I could still see the Bears keeping him just because he drafted Justin Fields, and I guess they want to give him some time with Fields.
I think
Maybe
that's
a year.
I think exactly what you're saying is the important part here, right? Where it's like Pace has hit on the stuff that makes you feel good, right? When you look at Akeem Hicks, when you look at the Khalil Mack trade, when you think about even the double doink, as silly as it sounds, I think that whether it's the McCaskies or a lot of Bears fans, a lot of people have taken a first round exit and told themselves they were a kicker away from winning the Super Bowl. Right? Which is some good feelies, if nothing else. So now you draft Justin Fields, you bring him in, and the good feelies are still there. And I sat here and I watched today on Twitter some people run through some mock drafts, seeing we have 5 picks and only 2 of them are in the top 100. And I remembered exactly why I am not a huge fan of Ryan Pace. I mean, the Bears need a reboot in the worst way. If they theoretically, I don't want to use never mind. That's a conversation for another day. But talking about Pace, I know this reminded me, this game, watching Kindle Vildor play meaningful reps, knowing he's not the injury corner, right? He's the original, picked at the start of the season CB2. We had him compete with Desmond Trufant, but that's it, right? He ends up coming in, got toasted today by one of the worst passing attacks in football. Then Duke Shelley, he'll get toasted by San Francisco and likely somebody else throughout the season. Mario Edwards, one of Pace's recent big signings. Look, I don't think he's playing badly, but he's gotten more penalties recently than he has big plays. There are a bunch of these guys that you could point at. Trevis Gibson is not a very good safety, and a lot of the other talent that was intended to start on this defense. And I think you can see a dearth of resources. I feel bad for Sean Desai. I honestly feel bad criticizing the defense because, truth be told, in case any Bears fans out there wondering why I'm not just bringing the hammer out, it's because I feel bad, complaining about Danny Trevathan because I didn't expect anything out of him in the first place. You know what I mean? It's one thing to be disappointed that Roquan Smith isn't surging forward as a spectacular player in the midst of a lot of the other supposed to be spectacular players on this Bears defense missing time. It's another thing to dog on Kindle Vildor for being a 5th-round pick pressed into duty. You know what I mean?
100%, dude. You said it best. He has just not devoted enough resources into the offense. And also with the defense, he just has not been able to either sign guys this year to play cornerback, or obviously bringing back Jimmy Graham was probably the worst decision I've seen out of any GM in a very, very long time, because even us Bears fans, we could tell that Jimmy is not really doing much for our offense. We had, Jesper Horsted kind of outplaying him in training camp this year. And I don't know what his cap hit was this year, but I think it was around 8 million or
9.8 roughly.
Yeah. And then we pushed some of the money into the future too for Jimmy Graham, which just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. You saw him today. He wasn't really doing anything out there. He dropped a touchdown pass. He did catch another one, which got called back, but he has not been a big factor. He hasn't been any factor in our offense this year. And we're paying him that much money, which we could have devoted to getting a cornerback number 2, or maybe another pass rusher, or maybe a defensive lineman. So there are some things I really love about Pace. I still think he's not the worst possible GM, just because I am kind of happy, like you mentioned, that he got us Justin Fields, that he is at least getting us, I guess, mediocre teams, but we should be looking beyond mediocre at this point. We should be hopefully building towards Super Bowls, and I don't know if we're doing that right now.
So I think the key in the GM conversation, which, truth be told, after the sponsor break, because the sponsors will get their words in, friends. We are going to talk about the refs. I think that there is a refs conversation to be had, and I'm not normally a blame the refs kind of guy. I would rather be an overcome the refs kind of guy. But when it comes to GM, I think the most important thing that you can take away from that is that I don't think that there's a single job in the NFL that's easier to just pick up where somebody else left off than general manager. A new coach has to come in and establish their tempo, hire their staff, bring in a whole bunch of people, and reset the way that everybody does literally everything. A GM, on the other hand, walks into a team, takes the resources, and sure, they've got to bring in their scouting staff. They probably have to hire a coach. Absolutely. But there's less intrinsic cost switching GMs than there is switching head coaches, unless you think about it from like an organizational, like top-down standpoint, but that seems like a lot of thinking. I don't know. The trouble for me is I would love to see the Bears manage their resources differently, especially with Justin Fields. I mean, the Bears have a rookie contract on the roster, and they still have cap trouble, which says a lot about the way that they've managed things, but we digress. I think we got to get out of the way at this point. We are deep into this podcast so that the sponsors can get their word in, and we'll be back on the other side in just a second.
Sure.
And we are back with Bear With Me. I'm here with Rishab Sikri, talking football, talking Chicago Bears loss 29-27, which is always weird to say for a game I'm so upbeat about. But when you look at this game, I think that there's going to be a conversation about refereeing. I've heard wild Twitter takes about protest the game, about NFL should issue an apology. Where is your head at when it came to what you saw from the
I'm
strikes?
kind of like in the moment, I was saying those exact same things. I was like, oh my God, the refs should be fired immediately. We should I don't know, we should do like crazy things and all. And that was obviously in the heat of the game. But I mean, I totally agree. Like you said, there were a lot of blown calls that went against us that a lot of them you couldn't even tell what the Bears were doing wrong. Like for the touchdown they called back for Jimmy Graham, I think they called 68, or who did they call on that? What did they even call?
Oh gosh, you mean James Daniels, the low block penalty?
James Daniels, yeah, they called a block penalty there, which even the commentating crew was like, "What did they? Do you agree with that call? By the way, was that like a BS call in your opinion?"
So it's brand new, is the trouble. It's basically a call to get rid of cut blocking. And I'm glad you asked about it, because I did know what it is. So if you've never seen a cut block, it's the one, or you've heard the term, but you don't know what it is. It's the one where an offensive lineman throws their whole body at the knees and lower of a defensive player, the really fast block. And that can turn into a lot of people getting hurt. So it's been a safety concern, and the NFL instituted a low block rule that outside of the tight end box, you can't cut. And what's been funny has been watching the way that people adapt to this, because you've seen Jason Peters continue to cut block. He just doesn't hit the person. Like he aims for about half a yard in front of the player and just shoots low. But even so, that call was so weird because Daniels barely touched Watt. Like, even if you thought that he cut blocked him, which according to that tight end rule, they even showed the box on ESPN. I thought they covered it pretty well, that he was within the legal area to strike at the lower area of the defender. Even then, I would consider it too much of a whiff to like take a touchdown off the board. But I'm also the person who, whether it was against the Bears or for the Bears, would have let Zach Miller keep his touchdown. So that's just me. But this definitely was the kind of game, I don't know. Like, there are going to be people that talk about the roughing the passer misses, which I think there's a conversation there, but it'll be had by plenty of other people. This was exactly the kind of game that made me wish that there was a sky official that could, whether it's call down and revoke bad penalties or potentially layer on penalties that were wildly missed. It would be nice to have, for lack of a better word, a replay official that could get on the phone or buzz somebody's hip pocket and be like, hey, you should pick that up, because that's not what you thought it was. And I don't know. It felt as if there was a massive skew against the Bears, so much so that even Brian Greasy and Louis Riddick continued to bring it up. And it was a bizarre game to watch, if for only that reason alone.
I mean, I think the thing is also, like, Bears fans always complain about something with the refs, and that's usually just us being biased. But in this game, like, even fans of other teams besides Steelers fans, even like, I don't know, Vikings fans, I was seeing like even Lions fans on Twitter, they're like, oh my God, the Bears are getting absolutely robbed here. And the commentators were talking about it too. So I think this was an extremely one-sided game by the referees and in the penalties that they were calling. Now, that's not to excuse the Bears' loss or anything. We still should have played better if we wanted to win this game on defense. We started out way too slowly on offense. But for a team that's rebuilding like the Bears right now, like, we can't overcome stuff like that. So that's why we're so mad when those calls happen.
Right. And not to mention, okay, so look, I don't think that the calls that I'm about to mention were particularly great. I think the Bears made both of these plays, but I've seen referees make different decisions on Marquise Goodwin's 50-yard ball where, like the commentators even said, like it looks as if the ball's moving around, even though Marquise had the ball in an awkward place between his hands. Like you could have called that a drop if you really wanted to. It's a catch by my standard, but my standard doesn't matter. I'm a guy on the internet. And the fumble or I think it was Ray McLeod's fumble on the punt that got taken back for a touchdown. The fact they ruled it a touchdown in the first place surprised me. Then watching it on the replay, again, I like the fact that it was a fumble ruling, but there was enough things that went the Bears' way that it doesn't negate the problems with officiating. It's just that, like you're talking about, it felt like they got their breaks in other directions, right? Even so, I definitely feel like games like these, sure, it's helpful when it's on prime time. It's extra helpful when it's against your team, so you feel like you've got a stake in it. But calls like that taunting call on the guy, I think it was Cassius Marsh, who got cut from the Steelers 2 months ago and made a huge coverage sack on third down to get the ball back and tried, as far as I could tell, not to celebrate. Instead, just looking at the other team because he's a competitor and drawing a taunt. I mean, there was a lot of this stuff that I find myself looking at, just wondering if the NFL really thinks this is the product that they want to put out on the field, because Justin Fields was electric. The game itself was dramatic, but the referees' consistent injections, when you've got your own broadcasting staff at ESPN just ragging on the officials, that's not what anybody wants. You know what I mean?
I've never met a single person so far that likes the taunting rule in the NFL this year. It's just the worst possible thing, because when you're in the moment making a big play, you're not really thinking about the stuff that's coming out of your mouth. And obviously, as a fan, you want to see people celebrating. You want to see people like talking trash back and forth. And that's something that makes the game fun, at least for me. So taking that joy away from the game, where you can't even like trash talk or anything, you can't even like look at the sideline or something like that, it's just like taking away the fun of the game, because it's impacting the results of games, and that's not what should be impacting the results. It should be your play on the field. So it's really stupid in my opinion, man.
100%. I mean, I think the hardest part about this game is that at the end of the day, whether it is the Packers jumping off sides, that now I will say the offsides rules are getting a little ridiculous, because what is it? A couple weeks ago, we saw two guys jump over the line and come back wearing green and yellow, the Packers, on that play that did not get called offsides, turns into an interception, which is fine. That's the way that I've always seen the rule called. And then last week, I can't remember which defender it was, basically flinched. Oh, it was the guy against James Daniels. There was somebody across from James Daniels that flinched. Daniels jumps up, draws an offsides. And in this game, Roquan Smith, pops his feet a couple times at the line of scrimmage. Yeah. I'm not convinced he was offsides there. Having watched that back, it looked to me like he was right where Robert Quinn was. So maybe they were both offsides, because 4 offsides in the game. But that there was some weird stuff throughout this one that I don't think it places a black mark. It's not an asterisk. This is football. You know what I mean? But it was a real bummer watching that first touchdown come off the board, and immediately the Bears took a 15-yard penalty the other way and didn't get it back off of what felt like a 2-step roughing the passer. Ugh, there's just a lot there. You know what I mean?
I mean, I feel like Fields is going to get those roughing the passer calls as he becomes a star quarterback in this league, because I guess the refs usually give those calls to like Aaron Rodgers, to Tom Brady, because they have a stature in this league, which that's not how the game should be called. But that's kind of how they call it, just because they have that respect, I guess. So it's kind of like the NBA, like the veterans get all the fouls and everything. And so far, Justin Fields, he's a rookie, so I guess he's not going to get those roughing the passer calls. And he also, I mean, for like dual threat quarterbacks, especially like Cam Newton, even Lamar Jackson, they're kind of more hesitant to call the roughing the passer, because they kind of think that you're, obviously running, and they don't want to call roughing the passer there. So it's kind of tough, obviously, but I think that in the future, hopefully, Fields gets those calls.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that makes this so complicated, is that there are some of these. I remember even the ESPN crew, to bring them up for what feels like the 4th time this podcast, was talking as if there should have been potentially a flag on that second down run Fields had where he slid and the guy came over him. I mean, there is a lot of this stuff where Fields, when he gives himself up as a runner, is a runner. and you're not afforded a lot of the protections that you get otherwise. But there's a balance there for sure. Either way, I felt like we would be remiss, right, if we didn't at least mention the refereeing, because there's going to be a lot of zebra talk as the Bears now fall to 3-6. You know what I mean?
Yep.
All right, so couple final questions before we sign off. Number one, does this game change your opinion about Matt Nagy?
No, not at all, dude. I mean, we started out this game really bad. We were down 14-0 at the beginning. We've had pretty much the same start we've had every single game, it seems like, in the Matt Nagy era, where we just cannot do anything on offense at the beginning. And then finally, we get a couple touchdowns. We get into it. I will give him credit, obviously, for the halftime adjustments that he made and for him being able to motivate his team to keep on fighting, because it seems like every single year we don't just give up after all these losses. Like, we come back, at least make our season somewhat respectable. So I still think he is like maybe a decent coach, like as a motivator, but as a play caller, I don't have the most faith in him. As a teacher, I don't have the most faith in him, because we still keep on making these dumb penalties, illegal formations, all that. He's not been teaching our guys, I guess, the right stuff. So long term, I still want him gone, but I feel like there were some positives in this game that I didn't see coming.
Yeah, I feel like that's a decent way to put it, right? Where I don't know. There are a lot of people who would like to say that Matt Nagy is one of the worst coaches in the NFL, and I don't think I agree with that. At even where he is now, I feel like he's clearly too good of a motivator, and yet the Bears are so undisciplined and so poor when it comes to the details that Nagy preaches that it's clearly time for change. I mean, whatever number you want to put on him, right? Whether you think he's the 22nd best, whether you think he's the 32nd best, like I personally feel like there's not a lot of reasons to keep him at the very least, given what we've seen with Anthony Lynn getting handed, or like Justin Herbert going from Anthony Lynn to whoever is his coach now, because I forget. Oh, it's Brandon Staley, and looking just fine. Like, clearly you can make the change from a rookie and you'll be all right. But all right, that's where we're at with Matt Nagy. When it comes to this game, what was most exciting for you?
Yeah, most exciting, definitely that last touchdown pass to Darnell Mooney, because I was screaming at the top of my lungs when that happened. I was even like live streaming on YouTube my reaction. So that had to be like the most excited I've been for at the ending of a Bears game in like at least a couple of years, because we saw our rookie quarterback go out there against the Steelers on like such a big stage, get that touchdown pass right in Darnell Mooney's hands. And I thought at the time that we were going to go on to win this game, because our defense was coming through with a couple stops throughout the game. So I thought maybe we can get one more, but sadly we lost. But that was by far the most exciting moment of the game.
I can't agree more. There's not a better one. I mean, the most surprising moment for me was no doubt the punt touchdown. I think it's Joel Iyiegbuniwe causing a fumble, DeAndre Houston Carson, who seems to be just everywhere when it comes to big plays, picks up the ball and scores. But Justin Fields not only living up to the moment, but living up to the moment in a hilarious hurry. I mean, he goes from 2-minute warning into the end zone in 2 plays with like 16 seconds of game clock. It was kind of funny, all things told, just how well Fields lived up to expectations. I mean, let's be honest, we were all thinking about how this was Fields' primetime debut. And no, America's Game of the Week against Tampa Bay does not count. Like, this game, Monday Night Football, was a big one for him, and I think he came out on a big stage in a big way, which matters. What worries you most about this game going forward?
What worries me is that I still feel like long-term there's a lot of question marks about like the pieces on the Bears right now, right? Like, we're not getting production out of guys like Kindle Vildor or like Duke Shelley. So there's like so many holes on the roster right now that I feel like against better teams, not to say the Steelers aren't a good team, but they're not like an elite team like the Buccaneers or the Packers or the Cardinals. So we still don't stack up well against the elite teams in the NFL. So that kind of worries me, kind of looking at like the future, right? Because we have a lot of pieces to fill. We don't have a lot of draft picks to fill them. We don't have, we do have cap space, but we have a lot of guys we have to re-sign and positions we have to fill. So it's going to be rough kind of building a team around this, but I do have faith in the quarterback now. I just don't have the most faith in the Bears organization still.
Yeah, I agree. Like, what you're saying is what I was planning on saying, for crying out loud. Where the scariest part about this defense isn't that I feel like they played poorly per se, but that they played up to what I would expect from each of them individually. Does that make sense? This wasn't the 2018 Chicago Bears defense blowing a gasket against Brock Osweiler in Miami. This was Ben Roethlisberger, a savvy veteran, picking on a whole bunch of guys that probably wouldn't be starting on a whole bunch of other teams, you know? I mean, the Bears looked to me like a team that was strapped for talent, especially on the defensive end. And that means it's going to take multiple picks. It's going to take multiple signings. And the Bears only have 5 draft picks and a little bit of cap space. We've already talked about that. I don't see where that gets better fast. And I don't know if I trust the Bears to truly take like a dead year in 2022. They could help them come out fresh in 2023. But even so, hey, you know what? Justin Fields look good. And at the end of the day, that's pretty positive, right?
It is, dude. I mean, we've also seen good quarterbacks with bad rosters. They can still sometimes win. You can't win Super Bowls with that, but you can still, you know, make fun seasons out of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the Bears, as we know, they headed to next week's big game against Bye, where hopefully they can come out with a win, but you never know. They may end up extending their 4-game losing streak. But when it comes to, all jokes aside, the Bears going forward, what do you want to see from the rest of this season?
Just continue to see growth from Justin Fields. I think we can all agree that's the only thing that matters at this point because, like we already talked about, the playoffs are kind of out of the picture now for us. Yeah, we're kind of still in it. We're only like a game and a half behind, but realistically, we are not going to make the playoffs. So if we can keep seeing these performances from Justin Fields where he's, you know, for example, throwing for almost 300 yards, where he's like coming back against even good teams, like, next week against the Ravens, that's going to be a tough matchup on both sides of the football. If Justin Fields can have a great performance against that defense, if after that he can have a good performance against whoever we're playing, I think it's the Lions on Thanksgiving, that's going to give fans hope for the future. So that's literally all I care about right now. How does Justin Fields look? Does he look like a star quarterback? Does he look like he has a lot of potential? That is what I care about for this season.
Yep. I could not agree more. I mean, my mind calls all the way back to 2017. So fair warning, any Bears fans, we're about to revisit some painful memories. Okay. But so I remember back with Mitch's, I think it was his first start against the Vikings. In a big moment, he ended up throwing a massive interception to Harrison Smith. And then in a huge game where Mitch Trubisky was going to really show out on a big stage against the Philadelphia Eagles, let's just say he did not have a banner day, but he beat the Browns. Hey, he beat the worst team in the league at the time, and he danced on the Bengals that same season. But there was a whole lot walking out of that season of question marks because Mitch played his best games against the only teams that you would peg him to play well against. If you considered him not very good, he beat the Browns, he beat the Bengals, and neither were great that year. And he played decently. No, actually, if memory serves, he got smoked by the Lions. So let's just leave that at the door.
Right.
I think what I was most scared about with Justin Fields was that we would get a statistically good performance against the Lions where he tossed some bombs, right? But then we would get a Fields that got stomped by Tampa Bay. We would get a Fields that played poorly, not poorly, but certainly the miscommunications he had with Allen Robinson made his Packers game. The highs were not that high and the lows were pretty low. You know what I mean? Gets destroyed. We already mentioned Tampa Bay, but you could throw Cleveland in there too. We needed him to do better against not just the Lions and not just Minnesota. I think you would agree. So he comes out against San Francisco, and he doesn't throw for 200 yards, but he does rush for 100. So a lot of people that want to be excited get excited. Now we get this game against the Steelers. It's an opponent the Bears don't even play that often. So you know that you're getting, at the very least, like a primetime game against an unknown opponent. And I think that stuff carries a lot of weight, right?
It does. Yeah.
It doesn't lock him in as a sure thing. Nobody's saying it does, but I can absolutely envision a scenario where he throws for 160 yards and a touchdown and a pick, and the Bears don't really have an answer. He comes out of the bye week, throws like 170 yards, rushes for 60, plays the Lions, plays really well, beats the Vikings once, loses to the Vikings once, and we come out where if you were already excited about Justin Fields, you were already you stay excited about him. If you were down on Justin Fields, you have reasons to be down on him. But walking out of today's game, I feel like even people that were starting to let doubt creep into their mind probably were at the very least lifted up a little bit. You know what I mean?
They had to be. This was also a top 10 defense according to a lot of the metrics. So they had a lot of talent on that defense. They had veterans on that defense too. And to come up against that defense with all the problems we have in this offense and to ball out in the way that you did, that is very impressive, like for your rookie year.
Mm-hmm.
So that was amazing.
Another person that I feel like so I just had this idea on the spot, but let's totally do it. Let's do a segment. I'll call it Tip the Cap, where if you were going to name something positive about the Steelers, like for all the Steelers fans that may listen to this, where did the Steelers impress you? I'll tell you, Mike Tomlin never ceases to surprise me with what he's able to get out of his teams, where as the Bears started to storm back, Chris Boswell hit some big kicks. The Steelers offense continued to click. I mean, even when they tried weird stuff like that Big Ben like zone read that didn't quite work, they hung in there. They got the plays that they needed, which, as silly as it sounds, is everything we've seen of Tomlin. I don't know if I walked away, again, like the keyword, like impressed in a league with the Rams and the Rams and the Buccaneers, the Packers with Rodgers. Like, there are a lot of really good teams out there, but Tomlin's Steelers never cease to surprise me. And this was a game that, if I could be honest with you, I feel like the way the Bears were playing, they absolutely should have won, and they didn't. So I'd credit Tomlin for that. What did you see from them?
I totally agree with everything you said there. I mean, it feels like even when the opponents are outplaying, Tomlin's teams, they still somehow win. I mean, he hasn't had a losing season since I think it's been 18 or 19 years at this point. So I still think that, they're in good hands coaching wise. They still have a lot of talent on that roster, on the defense, especially. I mean, their defense was giving our offense problems for a good portion of the game until we finally came back and we made the halftime adjustments. So, TJ Watt, I think he had like 3 or 4 sacks in this game too. So TJ Watt had a very big night. He is still by far a superstar, and he's gonna feast on young quarterbacks, especially like Justin Fields. So I think that there's a chance the Steelers could still make the playoffs. I mean, I haven't looked at the standings right now, but I think they're still in the mix. So I would still be pretty happy if I was a Steelers fan.
Good Lord, all you reminded me of was that awful, awful play where, truth be told, I mean, Brian Greasy mentioned that he had it on Justin Fields. I have no idea what the assignment there is, but Justin Fields, faking that handoff on the play action pass and getting just drilled before he even turned around.
Yeah, that was bad.
Gosh, I don't think I'm going to have near as much fun watching this game back for Wednesday night stream, for the first half. But it's worth it for the back end, right?
100%, dude. I mean, the beginning was really bad, but then the way we came back, I think that made the game pretty fun to watch.
Absolutely. Where do you think the Bears go from here? Like, we've talked about what you want to see, but what are you waiting on as we head into the bye week before we close up?
Oh, you talking about wins or losses, or just
I don't know. Whether it's stuff on your channel, honestly, let's get really broad, right? Like whether it's stuff on your channel, whether it's things that you want to see from the Bears, things that you just think will happen. What do you think is next for you and the team?
Well, personally, I want to see the Bears probably, I don't know. I think Justin, what are the Bears rookie records? Because I think he could break a lot of them still. I think the passing yard record is super low.
Passing yard record's pretty low, and he's got a lot of games to do it, which is on his side. I think, I think it's if he throws for 10 touchdowns. He's got one half of the rookie record. But Windy City Gridiron's own Jack Silverstein pointed out that there's a guy whose name escapes me that threw for 13 touchdowns in 1942 that the Bears basically forgot about and have credited Kyle Orton's 9 touchdown season as the rookie record for forever. So I don't know what number he needs to clear to announce it, but either way, that's on the the horizon.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think all those records are still, I mean, they could be achieved, right? Because we have an extra game this year. We also have a game coming up against the Lions where I hope he goes off on that game on Thanksgiving. That's going to be a lot of fun if we get a good performance out of Fields there. So I'm pretty much just looking forward to more good performances out of Fields. Like, I don't see our team necessarily winning enough to make the playoffs. I don't think we're going to be a good team down the stretch. We got, battles against the Ravens, the Seahawks, like really tough teams. So it might not be pretty, looking at the results, but if we just see all these big plays out of Fields, if we can continue to make some highlight reels for Fields and like all the other players in the Bears, like that would make me pretty happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest part to watch about this is that right as Fields seems to have hit his stride, the Bears defense seems to have lost the edge that made them the Bears defense, and now they look more like the 2020 Chargers. But even with that, I mean, maybe the Bears will get back E. Jackson Mack at some point, and that'll help them out. Eddie Jackson's hamstring injury has me worried, if only because I feel like it's always hard for people to come back 100% from hammies. Not to mention, we're not really mentioning that Allen Robinson went down with an injury at the end of the game. And I think it's either an ankle or it's like a tissue injury. I can't remember quite what I read right before we started the show, but either way, that's not good. But with that in mind, Justin Fields at the end of that game was oozing confidence. He was oozing it factor. I mean, you can't not be excited to watch it. It'll be interesting because, you watch all these other teams, right? I can think of a couple. The Panthers, the Falcons, the Eagles, right? You go, man, these teams, they're not very good, but I guess they're not bad. And it's weird to think about, like, the Bears are one of those teams. We just know them a little too well to be realistic about the fact that, yeah, sure, the Bears may be a slightly better team than I think their 3-6 record at this point. I don't think that they're going to be playing the Vikings and the Vikings will find it an easy contest, but their record isn't great either. So there's a whole lot of weird on the Bears schedule that won't mean much in terms of the wins and losses, because if you aren't making the playoffs, what are you doing when you don't have a first-round pick? But even like as long as the Bears have Justin Fields and Justin Fields remains healthy, I think they're going to come out the winners of this season, Yeah, maybe not total, but at least winners in their own way.
No, I agree with all that, man. If Justin Fields looks good, that's literally what most Bears fans care about. If we have more games like this, to be honest, like where even if we're coming back from like bad starts, if Justin Fields looks good in them, that's pretty much what we care about. So
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We put together a nice little hour show here from 11 to midnight. So tell the folks at home, what are you working on next? What you got going on?
Yeah, so I'll be coming out with a bunch of videos on my YouTube channel, obviously breaking down this game. I know we got a bye week now, so I won't have much content about the Bears coming up, but I will have a lot of Bulls content too. I've started doing Bulls content as well. So if you guys want to watch some Bulls content, Chicago sports content in general, definitely subscribe to my channel, the Windy City Productions. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
It's a big season for the Bulls, right? I mean, I'm a Mavs guy, so you got to tell me about it. Man. Like, what is going on with the Bulls?
Man, we changed our entire front office. We got a new head coach, something the Bears should do as well, and everything has changed regarding the Bulls, man. Like, we actually got some really good trades this offseason. We got good signings as well. So it's I think for the first time since I think it was like 1990s or something, like we actually have a very good start to the season.
That's legit. I mean, couldn't be any more different if I'm not understanding than what's going on with the Blackhawks, but we don't need to get into that side of it. Either way, thank you so much for jumping on. Great having you.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for having me on. That was a lot of fun.
And that technically wraps the podcast. I'll edit that together in a little bit. But have you been watching the chat at all? Because you've had a whole lot of people that have blown it up.
Oh, shoot. I wasn't even looking at the chat because I don't have the YouTube pulled up. So
I'll definitely... it up. You got a little bit, okay. Unless you want to go, or unless, like, again, I'm now remembering that I'm excited, but it's also midnight on a Monday. So if you got to go, you got to go. Don't let me hold you.
No, it's fine, dude. It's totally fine. I'll probably be sleeping late tonight anyways.
I hear you. To go through a couple while you're looking stuff up. So, First things first, chat, we got to be civil. We're going to disagree about football sometimes, and that's all right. But civil conversation is the hallmark of, I think, all football channels. I would tend to think that you'd agree with me on that. That like if you can't, like we got to be able to disagree civilly and so on and so forth. But at Adamola they have, but here and there. Anyways, getting back to it. Gary, you mentioned talk about the refs, like refs, please. I hear you. If the Bears didn't have that swing, that very, very memorable swing, not just the taunting call, which is its own thing, but going from, what was it, touchdown on 2nd and goal to 2nd and 16 to a blown roughing the passer call is going to leave a bad taste in anybody's mouth. But that's where I think the root of this ref stuff comes from. It, like, did Jaylen Johnson commit defensive pass interference? That's a great question. That's a question I don't really want to answer because maybe, kind of. Like, looked to me like Deontay Johnson initiated the contact, but Jaylen also got a whole lot of them, so you get the idea. But let me see, Gary. What are we talking about? Like, was it or secure ball in your hip? You get the idea. But I'm curious about the play you're mentioning. I don't want to get too tied up. But yeah, anybody got any questions for Rishab before we log off? Oh, somebody's talking about Tevin Jenkins. What are you thinking there?
Oh, man, I hope he plays soon. I mean, actually, I don't know because I don't want the Bears to risk anything with his back injury. But I'm a big fan of Tevin, man. Like, seeing his highlights in college, he's like a super fun guy as well. So I'd love to see him on the field. But if he's not healthy, then probably don't risk it. Because Peter's actually been like really good so far this year. Not like really, really good, but like for the money we're paying him, he hasn't been as bad as I thought he was going to be.
Totally. I mean, if anything, I think the most complicated question that I've had to tumble around in my head, right? So somebody asked about Larry Borum. I don't know what you thought. Larry Borum, to me, was totally unnoticeable, which we talked about this last Wednesday during the film review, that there were a lot of mistakes that Larry Borum made, but he's also a rookie with very little practice. So being able to be relatively unnoticeable on passing downs is huge. Massive step forward from, what is it? Oh, gosh, Latavius Simmons.
Simmons, yep.
Got to start somewhere. But Borum has me thinking the weirdest thought that I have to throw at you, okay?
Yep.
So Jason Peters is playing well. And you don't probably want to move Borum while he's in a groove, right? Yeah. But if you could, would you play Jenkins at guard to get him on the field? Or would you just give him second-team reps?
I don't know about that, man, because I don't want him to be a guard long-term because that's not what we drafted him to be. And when obviously muscle memory is an important thing in the NFL. So for, trying to play him as guard, he's kind of get used to playing guard. I don't know how exactly that would work. I'm not like the biggest expert on the offensive line, but I would rather him be at his natural position at right tackle or even at left tackle because long-term, that's where he's going to play. And I think that this season doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So even if you want to pull Jason, I don't know why you would pull Jason Peters, but if you want to put Larry Borum at left tackle, Tevin Jenkins at right tackle, just to have like the future kind of be in the lineup, I guess you could kind of make that make sense. But I don't know, because I think Peters also played guard at the end of last year with Philadelphia. I'm not sure how good that went, but he's obviously a bigger guy. I guess he wouldn't be like the worst at guard, but I don't know. He's been doing pretty good at left tackle too. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a legitimate argument to say that Peters has been the Bears' best lineman if James Daniels hasn't been so. I heard Kevin Fishbain talk about this on Bears Banter, where he was like, I think James Daniels has been the best lineman. And I was like, I almost want to disagree because he's not been spectacular, but he's also not been bad. Like, he's been the lineman that gets beat the least and is in position the most. He doesn't have any of the sexy blocks outside of that pile drive he had against Vegas. But because he's a guard, he's a little harder to notice, right, than Peters. So that's definitely a weird one. But, yeah, I know I'm definitely going all over the place on the Jenkins thing because I don't think I trust the Bears to fully play the kids. But I would love to see him get some developmental reps before the season's over.
Even guys like Daz Newsome, like I don't know what the deal is with Daz Newsome. Obviously, he was injured in the offseason, but like I would like to see him get some reps because in a couple of games, like we might not even be in the playoff hunt to the point where like playing guys like Goodwin and all that, like that would matter. So I kind of want to see like the young kids get a chance if we're out of it.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, I'd love to see the Bears find a center whenever they can. Like Pickett, free agency, draft, like a lot of options there. But
I know the guy from Iowa is like amazing this year, but he's not going to last to the second round, right? Linderbaum from Iowa, he's like, I think he's going to go like probably top 20 or something, but he is amazing. Yeah.
I think that's the hardest part about center, right? Where it's like, do the Bears need a super stud at center? Well, not really, but I think they could do better than Sam Mustipher. But yeah, I think at least chat's saying Linderbaum will be gone in the first. I'm sure that's right. I haven't watched any of the tape. If you're where I'm at, I've got my hands full with normal work and YouTube and the Bears. Like, I can't get in a draft until December. But, yeah. Let me see. So somebody said or asked, would it be better to go for a Hail Mary instead at the end? What do you think?
I don't know, because he was kind of close to making that too. Like, did he hit the post or not? Because I couldn't tell at the end.
He was about 5 yards short.
Oh, never mind. Okay. Yeah, I don't know.
Bounced and hit the post.
Yeah, because from the broadcast, I thought it like hit the post, and I was like, oh my god, they're gonna make some more doink memes out of that. But I think that, yeah, I would have liked to see a Hail Mary, because with Fields' arm and everything, he could probably get it down the field. But statistically, Hail Marys don't have a good chance of working. So maybe give it to Cairo.
I'm kind of in the same spot where it's like, don't get me wrong, I probably would have gone for the Hail Mary, but I'll also be the first to tell you that when they lined up for the kick, right, I thought to myself, oh, he's going to make it, isn't he? You know, I believed.
Yeah, it was going right down the middle too. It just didn't have enough power on it.
If I was the coach, right, and my kicker, and I looked at my kicker and was like, "Can you make this?" And he was like, "Yes, I can." I absolutely would have put him out there because I'm a cornball, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yo, that ends the streak, by the way, right?
I know.
Oh my god, no.
It depends on how you see it. Like, he kind of lost it on the PAT, but yeah,
god dang,
it does end the streak.
That is really rough to lose it on a 66-yarder like that.
Still, though, like, I think, what is it? He set it up. Yeah, 65-yard kick. So, absolute boomer of a kick. But, man, it was just such a wild game. Oh,
it was a fun game, though, dude.
Somebody asked, what do I have to say about Grant? I think the toughest part about Jakeem Grant is everybody's acting like it's his decision whether or not he's going to take the ball out of the end zone. He's obviously got the green light. I think he's an electric and dangerous returner. But at the end of the day, I think, any KR has to own whether they were net good or net bad for their team on any given day. And today, Grant got tackled at the 10. Grant got tackled at the 20. Grant got tackled at the 18, and Grant fumbled the one that he broke. So, net bad. And
very, very bad.
He's got to bring it up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He's not had the most good games either with us, right? Like, I think he had like one game where he had a couple good returns, but otherwise he probably hasn't been the best signing so far. Or trade, actually. We traded a 6th-round pick for him.
The trouble is that, so he's definitely... him versus Khalil Herbert in that kick returner role, which, by the way, we didn't even talk, like, we got so distracted, we didn't even talk about Montgomery and Herbert, which I don't know where you were at, but it was, okay, so here's a question I got to ask you, and if anything, I think I'm glad I didn't ask this on the podcast, because it might have been too fiery, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Tell me, honestly, did Montgomery seem slower than you remembered him because you've watched Khalil Herbert for 3 weeks?
A little bit, yeah, for sure. I think that the injury he suffered maybe had something to do with that too, because he was on a tear to enter the season, right? Like, he was like top 5 in rushing before he went down. So I still think Monty is a good back, but definitely it did feel like you weren't getting the same speed, the same agility you were getting out of Khalil Herbert. So that's a fair question to ask. I know a lot of people are massive Dave Montgomery fans. I am one of them too, but I guess long term we'll see kind of how we split carries, because they have, I guess I would say, kind of similar skill sets in that they're both kind of power guys, but they do have some of the speed too. But Herbert is faster in my opinion.
Oh, I mean, let me be clear. That made it sound like I'm massively anti-Montgomery, and no. I'm not. Dave Montgomery's clearly a good player. That run where he carried the Steelers like a good 8 yards after contact with bodies all over him. I mean, I was just sitting there finding myself thinking, like, gosh, you gotta love the guy so much. Not to mention, the Bears are clearly, I'm just going to tell everybody the big secret. The Bears are clearly planning for this. It's obvious at this point. Eventually, they're going to have the former high school quarterback pass on that Wild Bear. Like, eventually, he's going to pull it out and he's going to throw the ball. Like, it's coming.
Totally forgot he was a quarterback in high school. That's a good point. Yeah, he has to at some point this year, man.
One of these days, it doesn't hurt anything that the wild bear has been awesome. You could make a real argument that wild bear formation has been their most successful formation thus far this year, and I don't even know if there's an argument anymore. Like, they ripped off, if memory serves, a 15-yarder, an 8-yarder, a 5-yarder, and the 16-yard touchdown that was one of the easiest touchdowns they scored today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's been working amazingly for us.
Yep. I mean, the weird part about it, so somebody mentioned in the chat, right? They're like, why is Monty running it and not Fields? I legitimately think that they're putting Monty in there because they don't want Fields to take the hit, but they still want that running functionality. You know what I mean?
Right. That totally makes sense. I mean, Fields has taken like a good amount of hits so far this year, so probably want to limit the hits a little bit.
And then Fields goes out there and he puts his shoulder down, which was half inspired and half never do that again.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Even the spin move he put on the Raiders linebacker, like that was obviously he did that in the national championship game, but like in a regular season game, you probably should not be doing that. Because we need you here for like a long time.
Watching Fields has been so funny in that because then he hits the 6 spin move against Detroit and it works. He then tries to spin on the Raiders and he gets lit up. And then he spins again against San Francisco, which works. And then today he decides that after, if memory serves, he misses Marquise Goodwin on 2nd and 10. So he goes into 3rd and 10. Picks up about 6 yards with his legs, tries to force his way over. Oh, he got wrecked.
He got popped.
Spade.
Yep. It's also what makes him so good though, because he wants to put the moves on you, kind of like Lamar Jackson does. But it definitely we don't want to sacrifice his long-term health for that. So I wonder what the coaching staff tells him about that. Like I guess they kind of tell him like, oh, if you're in the open field, maybe like try to slide if you can, but when you're trying to win a game, that's kind of hard.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, right? I have to imagine that when you're coaching these kinds of guys, you're like, don't get me wrong. I want you to be healthy. But at the same time, if it's 3rd and 1 and you got to knock somebody over, you put your head down and go get the yard. But it's such a balance, right? I mean, I remember to use what I think is my perfect example. Right, we had Mitch Trubisky, who in 2018 was like loose-legged Larry, just running all the time. And in 2019, whether it was one time in a meeting or 80 times, I don't know, but Mitch stopped running. You know what I mean? Somebody told him he needed to be a pocket passer, and he took that so to heart it was ridiculous. But he did it nevertheless, and became this pocket passer that didn't use one of his best weapons. There's a balance here, you know? Like Fields needs to be able to occasionally leg out a first down, but also know when he's going to step up in the pocket, get ready to run, realize Mooney's going to be streaking wide open 45 yards downfield and try the bomb. You know, it's a balance. But if nothing else, the best part, at least I think, I don't know what you're thinking, but he's learning. He's clearly getting better at it. And the more he's succeeding, the more defenses are going to get put in a hesitation bind where they don't quite know what to do. Do you play contain on Justin Fields and give up the bomb? Do you go after Fields as a rusher and potentially let him break free? There's not a lot of great ways when Fields is truly on top of his game to stop him. I mean, we're going to get a lot of free likes and retweets. I know we are. Just posting that Fields touchdown to Mooney, because the dot on 3rd and 2 was awesome. I'm not going to take anything away from that play, but there's something beautiful about the broadcast view of Fields dropping back, sitting in a pocket, not liking what he sees, just sort of almost jogging out to his left and flicking the ball for a perfect touchdown that was just... That was a chill.
It was amazing. It was totally amazing, man. I still can't believe that tonight was real in some ways, because I've been dreaming of Fields having a moment like this where on national TV against a good defense, with the game on the line, he goes down the field and scores what I thought was going to be the game-winning touchdown. So I mean, like I've been saying pretty much this entire time, I'm still like, this is probably the happiest I've ever been after a Bears loss, because usually I'm pretty pissed off about what happened. But I can't find myself pissed off at all, because I'm just looking forward now to the future, especially
100%.
with Justin Fields.
And it's funny because, like, then you take a look at the future, and let me see where are they right now? Because did the Chargers lose?
Did they actually?
Did they lose?
I
Like,
wasn't
that's the
watching
thing.
that
I
game.
can't quite remember. No, they won. They beat the Eagles.
Okay.
But so the Chargers went from really bad to 5-3. So and they look solid in a tough division. I mean, there's a whole lot of this stuff where I think the Bears can get legitimately better around Fields in a hurry, whether it is the right coach. I mean, okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot. If you got to pick a coach right now, who would it be?
I was leaning towards Kellen Moore with the success he's had with the Cowboys, but I also acknowledge that he hasn't had a lot of experience coaching, and he's also only like 30. I think he's like 33 or 34 years old. So he would be, I think, by far the youngest coach in the NFL. He doesn't have the most experience, so that's a extreme risk for the Chicago Bears, like bringing in a guy that doesn't have all that experience. But I feel like sometimes experience is overrated too, because you see a lot of young guys like Sean McVay. I mean, Sean McVay had experience too, but you see a lot of young guys come in and have a lot of success. So I think I like the stuff that Kellen Moore is doing in Dallas. Like, he's having Dak, except for last week. Last week was very bad for the Cowboys. But if you put last week aside, he's had Dak Prescott having like a career year with the Cowboys, like in first place. And I think he has more control over that team than, you say Mike McCarthy does, because Mike McCarthy, in my opinion, is not the best coach. He was kind of the reason why, Aaron Rodgers wanted to get rid of the head coach. So I think that Kellen Moore is a good option. What do you think?
So the one thing I'll say about Kellen Moore that freaks me out. So I think there might be a two-part here, right? But Kellen Moore has such a good offensive cast that I part of me wonders, just wondering aloud, right? That if I handed you 3 months to design a playbook, how well would Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, Dalton Schultz, and a really good offensive line, Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott do for you? You know what I mean? Like, could you print out a Madden playbook and do well? I don't know. I'm not making that assumption. You know what I mean? There's a lot of really cool things Kellen Moore has done. But another thing I'll say, just talking, again, we're talking out loud here, right? I'm trying to figure out what went wrong in the Nagy hire. And one thing that sticks out to me is Nagy was an offensive coordinator for 1 year, if memory serves. So there's an aspect of that gaining experience where, like you're saying, whether it's Joe Brady or Kellen Moore, I think they're fun names, right? They're new, right? They're boring, like boring old Greg Roman, who's been in the league for like 9 years. Who would think that he would be their coach? But at the same time, Nagy was an offensive coordinator for 1 year. He didn't really get a chance to make connections in the league, ends up hiring a bunch of guys who he doesn't really know, and here we are. You know what I mean? But so when I think about it, because I'm a massive pro pass nerd, I like the idea of Brian Daboll, because Brian Daboll, not a, like, sure, you could hang your hat on the developed Josh Allen thing. You want to go for it. You could say he's this or that in scoring and so on and so forth. Sure, go for it. A head coach can't bring his receivers with him. He can't bring his coaches or like his quarterback with him. What I like about Brian Daboll is that if his passing game is working, he doesn't stop throwing the ball. Like, he doesn't feel tied to balance for the sake of balance. You know what I mean? He schemes passes that his quarterbacks like. And say what you will about, like, Mitch and so on and so forth. There are a lot of people, even right now in the comment section, that are talking about how Daboll's a streaky play caller. And he totally is. Like, absolutely he is. A lot of these guys can be too smart for their own good at plenty of times. But I love his philosophy. And if I had to take a more boring... So, do you follow... If I said Cowboy Stats and Graphs, do you know who that is on Twitter?
I don't believe so. I might have seen his tweets, but I can't recall right now.
Which is fine. One thing he said that stuck with me, and who knows, maybe it'll stick with you too, because it really drilled into my head, is he was like, if your favorite prospect fell to my pick, I would trade down because your second favorite player's evaluation is much more honest. And I was like, ooh, that hurts because my second favorite right now is probably Greg Roman, who's taken Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick and Tyrod Taylor and Lamar Jackson, who are very different quarterbacks, and made all four of them successful in their own unique offense. Where so much so where the people that look at Roman and say, I'm not a big fan of Roman, I don't want to see that Lamar offense here in Chicago. I'm like, what tells you that Lamar's offense is going to come to Chicago just because Fields can run a little bit when Roman has done a lot more offense than just that one? Like, there is an aspect of that I can't get out of my head, but I don't know. The coaching thing's tough.
What do you think about hiring like a defensive-minded coach?
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know, because the only thing that kind of makes me nervous about that is that defensive-minded coaches, they obviously hire offensive minds, and then the offensive minds leave after a couple of years if they have success. So that's kind of the one thing like I don't want to happen. Like I want Justin Fields to have stability with this play caller, and kind of feel like with the defensive-minded head coach, you're probably not going to get that. Like, Bill Belichick succeeded with that because his coordinator has been there for like a very long time. Like he does not leave ever. So I think that if you want to have long-term success, you probably have to have the same coordinator. And I think that hiring an offensive-minded coach, that'd probably be the way to go.
And I mean, let's be honest, right? That's the big fear, isn't it? That like Fields would find an offense he likes and the guy would immediately get hired for his work with Justin Fields. Like, I totally get that. That's probably why it pushes me back towards an offensive head coach. If anything, truth be told, I've just been couching my favorite head coaches behind, well, I want to fire the GM. So we got to pick a GM and then they'll pick the coach based on who they know. And so that's my way of getting out of it, right?
I just really hope we don't hire like some like Jim Harbaugh, for example. Like what do you think about Jim Harbaugh if he gets fired from Michigan?
I don't know. I think Jim Harbaugh has become such a polarizing figure that that I can't see him clearly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel that totally. He's obviously not a bad NFL coach. I think he was only in the NFL for like 4 years, right? Like with the 49ers. And he had a very good team like every one of those years. I just feel like by now, maybe there's a question to be asked, has the game passed him by in some ways? Like, does he still have the connection to the NFL? So I really don't know. Like, Michigan fans hate him right now, I know.
So somebody's asking why we don't like Jim Harbaugh, right? And I think all my reasons for not liking Jim Harbaugh are stupid. Like, they really are. They're like, I don't like his faces. I think he's so boisterous. Like, he went to Michigan. He didn't even succeed at Michigan. Yeah. Like, the Michigan teams are always disappointing.
Yep. He did go to the NFC Championship game like multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, there are legitimate reasons to really like Harbaugh. And if you believe in him, like, I totally get it. I'm laughing at myself.
It would be such a controversial move, though. Like, every single person will be talking about Jim Harbaugh if he comes to the Bears, but I feel like that might take away from the team and, like, themselves. So
okay.
I really don't know.
You want to hear my dark horse pick for Bears coach? And I'm not even saying I like this move, but it wouldn't shock me at all if it's Todd Bowles. Like, Todd Bowles would be Todd Bowles is the situation where Tampa Bay goes on a run again, and so now that's 2 years in a row where his defense has been nuts. He was the coach of the Jets, who suck. They suck so bad. Like, Robert Saleh may not be able to pull the Jets out of their muck. Like, so you end up with this guy, and what I keep finding myself saying is that Todd Bowles, for better or for worse, is Matt Nagy's opposite. Like, he's a defensive coach. He's measured. He walks it. He doesn't talk it. He is in so many ways like like Matt's opposite. That George McCaskey, who I don't think is a huge football guy, like he looked 8-8 from 2019 to 8-8 in 2020 and thought, well, the team didn't get any better. It's like, that's your take. So there's a lot of this that I'm like, if they had to pick the coach, he makes too much sense. Like, just as a safety pick. I don't even think I'm a big fan of that choice, but it makes sense.
It's not like, I feel like it's not the move that gets us to the Super Bowl. Like it might get us like to, like you mentioned, like 9-8 or maybe like 10-7 or something like that. But that's not gonna put us over the top, in my opinion.
Right.
Kind of, yeah. I don't know. I'll have to look up like more head coaching options because I'm sure the Bears are gonna hire like some random person we've never heard of just because they're the Bears. I mean,
Why?
when we first hired Matt Nagy, dude, like I obviously knew about Nagy, but I was like, no way we're hiring this guy from Kansas City. And then I saw a notification on my phone. I was like, oh my god. I was like looking up the Kansas City offense. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be amazing. Turned out to not be really amazing.
Okay, so we could end on this because, like you're saying, we're getting pretty late. But let me ask you this, okay? Try your best to take your navy and orange glasses off, and anybody in the chat, you do the same, okay? If the season ended today, which rookie quarterback do you think looks most attractive to coach?
That's a tough one.
Like, say, just for example, right?
Yeah.
Let's pretend that Zach Wilson is on the trade market, right? Mac Jones isn't moving, and San Francisco, they've got him in there forever. You know what I mean? Like, so Wilson is for some reason getting sent off on account of Mike White's resurgence, and you've got an opening potentially in Jacksonville and an opening in Chicago. Do you think Fields is the, like, I don't know, the lure that brings in the big fish? Or do you, honestly speaking, think that other people get first dibs, basically?
I really feel like, dude, I mean, especially with Chicago being a big market, too, if you were to have success in Chicago, which not a lot of head coaches have had success here, on the offensive side of the football, with a rookie quarterback like Justin Fields, who was like shined on the national stage in college, right? Like he outplayed kind of Trevor Lawrence in the college football playoffs. He's had a lot of big games on primetime television. So I think that Fields has been such a high profile prospect where I think it's possible we could get some of the top offensive minds. Now, I'm not trying to say that he's been more impressive than Trevor Lawrence because I still feel like, you know, Trevor Lawrence obviously was the better prospect coming out of college. He still has, you know, a lot of upside in this league. So Trevor Lawrence could be, you know, a more enticing prospect long term, but I don't think that Urban Meyer is going to leave obviously next year. And I don't know. Do you think Urban Meyer is going to leave, or?
I don't have any idea.
Okay.
I would, like, I'm the same person that legitimately got suckered into thinking that Aaron Rodgers was going to leave, and now he may stay another year. So, you know, maybe.
I still think he's leaving next year, man. Like they have like negative 50 million cap space or something.
I hope he leaves.
I really hope he leaves, man. Jordan Love looked horrible. Maybe not horrible, but
we can say it. Jordan Love looked perfect. Jordan Love looked ideal. Jordan Love looked good enough to convince yourself that maybe with a little more time he gets better, but bad enough to wonder how much better is that going to be. Like, I thought personally, like, the chat said it well, Jordan Love looked like a rookie a year and a half into his career. That's not, like, terrible.
He's also, No, I was going to say he's also been in the system for a year and a half, and he's also on a system that has success with a different quarterback, albeit, you know, an MVP level quarterback, but they have proven success in the system. So I was kind of thinking he was going to have a better stat line than what he had. It was his first start, obviously, so it's, you know, rookie mistakes are going to happen, but the Chiefs had the 31st ranked defense according to DVOA. So it's kind of like, I'm not a big fan of Jordan Love. Obviously, I mean, I'm a Bears fan, so I'm not going to be, but
I think what hurt me badly was realizing that just like, what is the word? Like, Jordan Love ended up with 190 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. And it feels like for Fields to match that stat line, he has to carry the world on his shoulders in these games. Like, he's just so stupid.
You know, even that touchdown that he had, Sorensen completely whiffed on the tackle. And that wasn't even like an impressive touchdown or anything. So, I don't know. I'm not trying to hate on Jordan Love too much because he's still pretty young. He still could have success. And I'm not trying to jinx anything, but I think that the Packers are not in good hands if he's their quarterback of the future.
Yep. I mean, not to mention, I thought Devontae Adams played his butt off. Like, the offensive line struggled. I think so. But at the same time, just calling it in what the world, like, or so on and so forth. I don't know. I'm trying to put my brain together here. The hardest part about watching the NFL from the broadcast angle is that a good quarterback makes the offensive line look good no matter what, and a bad quarterback makes the offensive line look bad no matter what. And I think Love played one game. Like, it's very Bears fan, right, to jump at the chance to finally slam the door shut, right, and say, we're done, we're out, we did it. But I'll tell you right now, I think that it is more realistic that Rodgers has 3 more years in Green Bay after this than instantly declaring that the Packers are going to enter like a 10-year losing streak. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I feel that.
I get it. I want the green and yellow domination to be done too. I really do. But just like how 291 yards and 291 yards through the air and 48 yards on the ground is a drop in the bucket, right? We have to see how things play out. And the Packers are getting a good look at Love. And if I was them, I would move on. Like, or not immediately, right? But we keep acting like Love is their quarterback of forever. That's not how it works. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, they can move off him like next year if they want to.
If you ain't it, you move. And it's Green Bay. I don't know. Green Bay may work against them. I mean, like, did you ever hear about, this is going to sound so weird. Do you ever talk to Brad OTC?
Oh yeah, I've seen his tweets. I don't exactly talk to him, but yeah, I've seen his tweets. Yeah.
Oh, no worries. I know him. I know him pretty well. And one thing that he told me about that I thought was super funny was he was like, "Did you know Green Bay invented the roster bonus? Did you know this?"
No, I did not do that.
Green Bay had to basically invent the workout bonus because none of the players would stick around. And so since none of the players were there, they started paying the players to be in Green Bay's facility. And so that's why the roster bonus and the workout bonus works like it does, is because there's a trick Green Bay used to keep people around. So I have no idea. I don't want to lose the Packers forever. Gosh, I want Fields to win this game.
Honest to God, man, even being unbiased, I think it's going to change eventually just because things change over time, man. I mean, it's been now 20 plus years of Packers domination. And like, there was a time before that where the Bears used to actually win in the rivalry. I mean, I wasn't even alive back then, but I've seen the stats and everything. I've seen like the highlights and all. And we used to beat them, but just not anymore.
Yep. No kidding. And hey, Mike, you know what? So Mike says, "Go Pack, go." First of all, want you to know that as a Packers fan, truly, Bears fans mean no ill will towards Packers fans. I think at the very least, Packers fans are great fans. You have done nothing wrong. We just don't like the losing.
Can't stand your quarterback or your team because you guys always beat us.
But yeah, and then Luke Olander mentions he says he's a Cowboys fan, and the best thing for Fields, in his opinion, would be to replace Nagy with somebody from the Shanahan tree, basically set up a whole bunch of deep shots and go from there, like simplify reads, so on and so forth. I totally get where he's coming from. I really do. One thing I find myself, if I was going to get excited about Dabble in particular, it's that like pass until you die motivation that makes me excited because I love Fields' arm. I mean, there are so many things where when I find myself thinking about what this Dabble offense would look like, I mean, think about all those MVP Josh Allen throws that you've seen. I know you've seen them on Twitter. Yep. And imagine Fields throwing very similar things, you know?
And he can.
I feel like the complex part, so Shanahan, in his own right, is definitely starting, I think anyways, to bring a cloud of question marks around his head.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, some fans think he's on the hot seat now, which is kind of crazy to think because he went to the Super Bowl like 2 years ago, but he's not had the most like wins with the 49ers aside from that Super Bowl year.
I mean, I think the scariest part about coaches, right? Like, let's play a game, right? Where if you wanted to, you could name any coach in football, and I'll try to work the negative angle, right? Because for Shanahan,
yeah,
he went to the Super Bowl. He was also 3-13. He's 32. I think he's 33-41. It always something. We just lost to Colt McCoy at home, and we won't even play Trey Lance. At least the Bears, in Chicago, who can't do anything right, are playing their quarterback. What are we waiting for? And I've been told about this great offense, and here we are, bottom half in scoring.
Yeah.
Like, was it defense that pushed us where we were?
Yeah, good.
Like,
Yeah.
was it that Bosa-led, like, incredible defense that they had that took us to the Super Bowl? Because it sure wasn't Jimmy G. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's so much of this stuff with
Also,
Shanahan.
I mean, 28-3 is gonna live on forever, man. His head. He had it there, and it wasn't only him that blew it, but he was part of the reason why they blew that lead.
Right. It does, and none of that, by the way, playing devil's advocate there makes Shanahan like objectively bad. But
Oh yeah, he's definitely not a
you do
bad
ask a question at some point, right?
because I mean, he gets loved so much by the entire media to the point where like a lot of fans think he's like the best coach in football. Like entering this year, a lot of guys were like, "Oh, Kyle Shanahan is like a top 3, top 5 coach," which according to the results, he isn't, at least as of now. So I think he has a lot of question marks for sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, I feel like grading coaching is just so hard. Period.
It is. There's so many different factors. Like,
So
how do
many.
you even grading Nagy is kind of hard because he does have. I mean, now it's not as hard because we've seen a lot out of him. But during the Trubisky years, it was kind of hard because we were like, oh, is this because the quarterback isn't good? Is it because the head coach isn't good? Is it because the offensive line isn't good? It's way too much to, take into account.
Oh yeah, I mean, like for instance, we would dog on the Bears play calling forever, which matters. You know what I mean? Like, nothing I'm about to say is to suggest that I'm in on Nagy, to be clear. But I mean, come on. On 3rd and 2, you call a slot fade and you get the receiver wide open. You would consider that a good play call in most circumstances. You know what I mean? I do feel like if you look at what happens in San Francisco, if you look at what happens in, honestly, pick your team. Bengals fans are doing this with Zach Taylor right now, right? Where it's like quarterback does well, Fields is the man. Quarterback makes a mistake, freaking Matt Nagy. I hate that guy. You know what I mean?
Definitely, dude. Also, when Bill Lazor took over, I don't even know if he's calling plays right now, but like every time we had like a bad or like a negative play, people were like, "Oh my God, Matt Nagy is back calling plays again." And every time we had a positive play, they were like, "Oh my God, Bill Lazor, you're so amazing." I'm not a big fan of either of them because Bill Lazor also didn't have like any success in the NFL before this. Like his offenses were pretty much always bottom 10, bottom 5. So I don't know how Bears fans can think that Bill Lazor is any sort of an upgrade when maybe he does some things different, but he hasn't been that guy that Bears fans want him to be.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think the tough thing is that Bears, you got to think right now, right? That Bears fans just want to be mad at somebody so that they can be happy about other people, right? Like I think my favorite example is Pat Freiermuth. I thought he had a great game. I don't know what you thought. Like rookie Pat Freiermuth, the tight end for the Steelers, I thought he looked awesome. And a whole lot of people tried to use that as the reason that Cole Kmet is a bust. And it's like, why are we calling Cole a bust? I mean, like, I get it. I don't know. Like, I'm really struggling because when people are like, what do you think a second round tight end should look like? I'm like, I don't know. Half the first round tight ends suck. Like David Njoku has never turned into anything. OJ Howard was surefire, and he was anything, or he's turned out to be anything but. Like, is a boring old blocking tight end that picks up 600 yards the old-fashioned way living up to expectations or not when you factor in bust potential? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And people are like, well, you should have taken what was the safety's name
Winfield?
again? Yeah, Winfield. People are like, oh my God, you should have taken Winfield. Well, then Pace would have selected, with his first 2 picks in the 2020 draft, 2 defensive players when our defense was already good. Our offense sucked.
Would have been livid.
it would have been. People would have been on his ass about that. So I think he made the pick that kind of made sense because we didn't need the tight end, but I could see how people don't like it because Kmet also, I don't think anybody thinks he has superstar potential, and the Bears need more playmakers on offense. So
right. Somebody said right here, they were like, maybe don't draft a tight end high. Honestly, I'm not about to say like that's the way to do it, but like if you want to not piss people off, that's the easiest thing, right? Because I mean, you find tons of these tight ends in all sorts of weird rounds, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where Kittle was a 5th rounder, and he doesn't count because he's a unicorn too. But
Yeah.
it's just funny how there are some of these positions. I'll give you my favorite example. Jeff Okuda never had a chance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
purely by being a cornerback drafted at number 4 overall, what was he going to have to do to be that number? You know what I mean?
You gotta
Like,
be Jaylen Ramsey. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
exactly. And Jaylen Ramsey's like one in a billion. Jaylen Ramsey's incredible. So like, what were you gonna have to do? And I look at that and I feel like people have done that with Cole Kmet, where they've been like, well, he's got to be Zach Ertz. And it's like Zach Ertz is 1 in a billion, and that's big to put on somebody. I guess I've been the boring person that's been like, I think I actually, thank God I said he looks to me like Kyle Rudolph in the draft video I did on him, so that it's actually on record, because he actually is. Like,
Yeah,
it's not even just the Notre Dame thing. I mean, Rudolph had 300-yard receiving seasons. Rudolph had like 650-yard receiving seasons. I think right now he's like still rumbling his way there. But it's funny to see the way that Bears fans talk about him, and Mooney's the other one that I keep thinking of, because if you ask fans on some weeks, Mooney sucks. I hate him. Like, why can't he do more? And on other weeks, he's already got his bust made in Canton. You know,
I think entering the season, like, Bears fans definitely overrated Mooney a lot in some ways. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was obviously a very big fan of Mooney. I was also like highlighting all the overthrows that Nick Foles had on him. But I think I remember during the Russell Wilson talks, people are like, "Oh, these are guys that I would not trade for Russell Wilson." And like some people are like, "Oh my God, you can't trade away Darnell Mooney for Russell Wilson." And I was like, "What the heck? That doesn't make any sense at all." This guy's a top 3 quarterback in the league, and you would not trade like a number 2 receiver for him, which I think that Mooney he's been really impressive for us. Don't get me wrong, but still has some ways to go if you want to be viewed as being an elite receiver in the league.
Yep. I feel like the Bears are at a real crossroads, right? Where it's like they've got one receiver under contract for the next year, I think, like 2022. I think it's just Mooney and Newsome, I guess. But is Newsome still a PSer, or is he on the roster?
He's on the practice squad, yeah, I think so.
Gracious. But so the Bears are looking at a reset at receiver, and I won't be surprised if they take it at this point. Like, whether it's Chris Godwin that comes into town, whether it's Juju Smith-Schuster, like whether it's names that, look, some people are going to hate some of them and some people aren't, because Juju is a solid blocking wide receiver that can do a lot in the passing game, and the TikToks are annoying, but from a player perspective, I think he's solid.
He is solid for sure.
But
I also think we should probably use our 2nd round pick on a receiver too. There's going to be a lot of good receivers that fall down.
I would love to see the Bears be willing to suck. You know what I mean? Like, be the fun team that's fun on offense and just gets boat raced on defense. I have talked about on this show before. I don't know where you're at. Like, I think the Bears are in the rare position where an actual full blow-up year would be somewhat beneficial. Where, like, Eddie Jackson is a really good player. You can trade him for something. Khalil Mack is a really good player. But by the time Eddie Jackson is good, or not Eddie Jackson, by the time Justin Fields is good, 32-year-old Khalil Mack, who's he going to be? You know what I mean? There's a whole bunch of this stuff that I look at that I'm like, I look at Roquan Smith. Roquan Smith is really good this year. Roquan Smith could be a $17 million linebacker in 2 years. So what do you want this team to look like by the time Justin Fields is good? What do you think it will look like by the time Justin Fields is good? And if they consolidated like all their resources into just clearing cap, soaking dead cap for 2022, and making the offense better. They take that 2nd round pick, they draft a wide receiver. They take their 3rd round pick, they draft a lineman. They just sort of work from there, right?
That'd be awesome, yeah.
That ain't bad.
It all depends on who our GM is next year, right? Because if it's Pace, I don't think he's going to be willing to suck. Yeah, because then his job is going to be on the line, because if he doesn't win in 2022, he's going to be fired. So I think if we do bring in a new GM, that could be on the table, like trading all of our older guys, trading Khalil Mack for, like, I don't know what he would get now, like 2nd round pick or something with this contract. I don't even know how high the pick would be, but trade away Khalil Mack, trade away Eddie Jackson, let Akeem Hicks go. That would be very sad as a fan, this team because I love these guys personally. But I think long term, what you're saying does make a lot of sense, right? Because we need to pretty much reboot this defense now and get a lot more young talent on it, and we need stars on the offense, and we just don't have stars right now. So I think it makes sense, but depends on who the GM is.
We will have to see. Goodness knows it'll be interesting to follow, but at the very least, like, honestly, I'll say this, and this could get me in trouble. God forbid this is clairvoyant. But if all we ever get from Justin Fields was this game, and gosh, I hope we get more than that, but it was still fun. Like,
yes, it was.
This is awesome. You know what I mean?
In some ways, it reminds me of Trubisky's 400-yard game against the Bucks because it was like a moment. It obviously wasn't that impressive, but like it was a moment where you thought you had your quarterback of the future, and feels good to be a Bears fan right now.
Exactly. I mean, so some people in the chat, like, I think somebody just said, like, how do you feel about that L? And it's like, well, I mean, the Bears are 3-5 coming off of a Niners loss that should not have happened. So losing to the Steelers is not surprising. The Bears covered the spread. Like,
yeah, +7, I think. Yeah. That's a victory in itself, man.
Yeah, I mean, they performed better than expected in any setting. You know what I mean? So losing, like, I think the trouble is that for anybody out there, Bears fans over the last 3 years have gotten pretty calloused to losing. Like, we've lost every way under the sun. You know what I mean? Like, we lost that 2019 Chargers game where the Chargers might as well have handed us the ball and said, "Go score. We're not going to stop you," and we just couldn't. We lost the Saints game with Teddy Bridgewater where we were like, Drew Brees isn't even playing. This is a trap game. No, we got destroyed. We lost.
Brock Osweiler beat us like again. I mean, that was in 2018 too when we actually had a good team, and then Brock Osweiler, I think it was like his third time beating us, and that was like, why are you losing to Brock Osweiler? That doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. What is it? Not Justin Fields. It was Nick Foles losing to the Titans, Nick Foles losing to the Rams, Nick Foles losing to somebody else there in the middle. Man. Those games, ripped my soul out of my body.
Dude, it was hard to be a Bears fan during that time. Like, not even exaggerating, because I've only been doing YouTube for like, I guess this is my fourth year now. But like usually it's because before that season it was like a lot of happiness, a lot of like joy, especially with 2018. That's when I started, and I was like, oh my god, doing YouTube is gonna be so fun. I'm gonna get to interact with Bears fans. We're all gonna be so happy. And then 2019, 2020 happens. That during that losing streak, like Bears fans were so toxic during that losing streak. There was like a lot of stuff going on, so it was hard to be a Bears fan.
It was so bad. Oh yeah, and then 2020 we went to, in these random moments you'd see the Bears that were like, they went to overtime with the Saints with Nick Foles, and you're like, what are we doing here?
Got the Javon Wims punch in that game as well. That was a pretty fun
moment. Oh my gosh, I forgot. Bears.
There's been so many memeable moments over the past like 3 years.
What was it? Fun. It was like, I think the Bears played a great first half, and then they came out in the second half. Javon Wims punched somebody, and Nick Foles immediately throws an interception, and it was like, oh no.
Yes, sir.
Then the Packers had us all buttoned up by the end of the first quarter, if memory serves, coming out of the bye. That was when.
Oh, that was really bad.
Oh my word! Oh my word! So did you know what was coming when you put together that Mitch redemption video? I have to ask. Like,
I mean, yeah, deep down I knew it, but I've just like always been making these videos. So I was like, why not make one last video for Mitch? Because he's probably not going to be after this year. And I saw a lot of fans on Twitter were always like, oh my god, haha, you're making a Mitch video. But bro, that's how loyal I am, man. I've made hype videos for Chase Daniel, for Mitch Trubisky, for Nick Foles as well. Justin Fields was the only good quarterback I made a hype video for.
Right.
So I was very happy to draft him, as you can tell.
I remember that one, like, if only because I saw you release it and I was like, oh no. Because honestly, going into that point, I couldn't tell at this point, or like at that moment, whether Mitch was about to come light it up for no reason other than pure chaos. right?
Yeah,
Or
that's
get
what
destroyed.
Yeah.
And then he ate that face mask fumble that will live in infamy, right? Where he gets his head just about ripped off and fumbles. And I remember sitting there trying to review that, like, I don't know what to say about this. Like, it's not fumble.
Seriously.
I mean, what are we talking about? Yeah, anyways.
It was also like, it was kind of rough because I saw, especially a lot of you guys that do like the analysis and all, like Trubisky fans got really mad at you if you said like anything bad about the quarterback, which that's a tough situation. I mean, obviously fans are going to be like really passionate, but you also got to know when to be a little level-headed.
Yeah. I think the hardest part about the Nagy era so far has been that there were a whole bunch of legitimate moments looking through like Mitch's tape where it was like, well, I don't know if Mitch made a mistake on this, but that guy's wide open. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so then you get to this and you can clearly see Nick Foles' frustration. Justin Fields wears his emotions so on his sleeve that you can see him like, what the fuck are we doing? And just like during some timeouts, and it's like, our quarterback is upset. You know what I mean? But oh yeah, and somebody mentions we started the Nagy era 12-4, so everybody was just like, we're going. We're in. Coach of the year. Let's do this.
Oh my God. 2018 was such a fun time though, man. That was prime, because I've never seen many good moments of the Bears in my lifetime, because I'm only 22. So it's been a lot of pain.
I feel like the real ones are the Bears fans that I think there are plenty of people. I started at and around 2018. It was too fun. It was infectious. You know what I mean? Yeah. The people that stuck it out through the bad times, to connect back to Fields, are the ones that I think, look, I understand that I'm lumping myself in this category, but you're there too. There are plenty of other creators where it's like the people who made it through that are becoming the hardened veterans because we've seen some bad times.
Yeah, we have, man. I mean, we've also seen worse times, like with Mark Trestman and all, and God, those are like some of the most embarrassing days of my life being a Bears fan. But
oh, sure. But it's funny where it's like, it's one thing when you are a Bears fan, and not to turn anything into something weird, but when you're creating any content and you have to find something to say about Nick Foles trotting out against the league's worst defense, the Tennessee Titans, and just sucking. Like,
so bad.
You have to say something about it. You're like, what do I do?
Actually, like trying to create hype videos too, because like you can't hype up a bad team. Like, what else do you do? And that was pretty much my hype videos of the past 2 years. Like even at the beginning of each season, I knew the Bears were probably not going to be good that year, but like I had to find some storyline. Like for 2020, I was like, oh, it's COVID. It's like, oh, we're gonna band together as a team around Mitch. It's his final chance with the Bears, and obviously none of that actually happened. So
we just lost. Mitch got pulled in the middle of his third week brutally. Like, if
actually sad.
I keep thinking about that, and I'm like, I can't tell whether that was a moment of coaching genius because the Bears won, right? Or whether it was a moment of, honestly, maybe the meanest thing Matt Nagy's ever done. Like,
and Nagy was like mean I wouldn't say mean towards Mitch, but he had a lot of moments where he was like very, very impatient with Mitch.
Like, honestly though, it really was. Like,
remember the Rams game too, where he was like, it seemed like Mitch was like on the sideline, like looking so sad, and like Nagy was like saying something to him, and Bears fans like wondering, oh, what is Nagy saying to him?
Man. Okay, so one thing that somebody's mentioning, so somebody's talking like, and then Nick went out and beat Tom Brady, right? So I guess what I'm sitting here thinking is that somebody really blew the opportunity to trade for Nick Foles at the trade deadline, because whether it's like the Kansas City Chiefs or the Buffalo Bills, like, don't you think that there's a shot out here that a contender could have just housed Nick Foles as Tom Brady's kryptonite, and then got into the final game, and let's say it's the Bills, and be like, Nick, you're starting. Josh, you're on the bench. Like,
not even that, dude. Like, just in case of injury. I mean, none of these teams, a lot of the contending teams don't have good backups. The Bills have Trubisky, obviously. I guess he's an okay backup. He's probably one of the top tier backups, actually.
I think so.
But, like, for the Chiefs, who do the Chiefs have? Is it still Chad Henne?
Oh, gosh. It's probably Henne. I mean, a lot of these guys seem to just love system experience, which became such a meme with Nick Foles. But they really do.
I was really thinking we might get at least like a 6th or maybe even like a 7th rounder for Nick Foles at the deadline, because it seemed like there was a lot of teams that needed quarterbacks, at least like backup quarterbacks. Even like the Saints. The Saints have Trevor Siemian right now as a star quarterback, and they could have had Nick Foles. So like it doesn't make any sense unless Pace didn't want to trade Nick Foles, because I remember, like, weren't they saying that they weren't going to trade Nick Foles to like a place he didn't want to go to, even though he doesn't have like a trade trade clause or anything. So
I couldn't tell whether Foles wanted to. That's going to sound really weird, right? But trades they're not really a two-way street necessarily, because the player doesn't really control their rights. But like, I don't know if Nick Foles wants to play again, but he's got another year and a half of free money that all he's got to do is just show up for work, point things out to Justin Fields and Andy Dalton. He's QB3. Like, he's QB3 on the Bears. He's making free money. Like, Blue Mountain State backup quarterback money. I don't know. I mean, for crying out loud, he had his second child, his third child, or something like that. Like, that's full-on conspiracy theory. But at the same time, what does Nick Foles have to prove to anybody? You know what I mean?
He was kind of like, didn't he want to trade like early on, like before the season started? Like, he was kind of hinting to, I forgot who it was, but like some team, he was like, oh, like, come and get me. Like,
you mean Indy?
Yeah, Indy. Yeah, when Carson Wentz got injured. That's not exactly what he said, but a lot of people are like, oh, Nick Foles is kind of hinting to the Colts that he wants to be traded there.
Yes,
because that would have been so funny if that actually happened.
Because it definitely made sense for Nick Foles to go and haunt Carson Wentz yet again, right?
Yeah, that would have been so bad.
Oh, Jordan, that presser Foles had, because Jordan mentions like Foles despises Nagy. Let's be real. That presser Foles had was hot, like hot in the sense of just like angry. Foles came out of the mic. It was like, everybody sucks. I'm fine. No, like, it's all their fault. It's his fault. It's his fault. It's his fault. I did fine. I'm just gonna go out there and dice it up with the third stringers. That was so funny.
The game after that, he did so bad in the preseason game against like third stringers. Poor Nick Foles, man. Poor Nick Foles. I mean, not poor Nick Foles. He's making a crazy amount of money right now for doing nothing.
It really is. Like, if I was making Foles money, I would not be upset. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, 100%, dude.
But either way, I just realized it's 1:05. So
yeah, what the time went by so fast.
No kidding, right? We're just having a good time.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for jumping on, man.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
I'll see if I can get you on my channel as well.
Please.
That'd be a lot of fun. Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely hit you up in the future. Other game this year for sure.
Let's do it, man. Awesome. That's great. I will. I guess. Yeah. I'll shut things down now so that I can edit this, and then I have a podcast that I can put up. But so
I'll probably record my post game reaction right now too. I'll probably just release it tomorrow though, because I think everyone
do it. 1 a.m. 1 a.m. post game reactions.
I might, to be honest, dude. I post a lot during like midnight and all, and like people are still awake for some reason. Like, I guess they just don't
Bears
sleep.
fans, right?
Right. Die hard.
Awesome. Hey, everybody in the chat, dude. Thanks so much for hanging out. You guys are the best.
That was a lot of fun.
This is great, man.
All right. See you, dude.
Absolutely. See you later.
Yep.